Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 7th meeting of the Independent District Commission. Today is Wednesday, May 17th.
So sorry.
No, we are
Apologies.
all good. Hold, please. And all right, so welcome everyone to the 7th meeting of the Independent District Commission. Today is Wednesday, May 17th, and we will be here from 6 to 9 p.m. via Zoom and in person at the Portland Building, room 108. And before we get started, I will pass it to city staff to go over Zoom meeting logistics.
Hey everyone. Hey everyone. Apologies.
There you
Okay, we're ready. Hey everyone, I'm going to take a moment to go over Zoom logistics. This meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of the recording will be posted on the IDC's website. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning, ASL and Spanish interpretation. To access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen and select Spanish. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button at the bottom right of your screen. Commissioners, please remember to change your Zoom chat settings to everyone so folks listening today can follow along with your conversations. And community members listening in, we have a Zoom Q&A feature available. Feel free to submit questions or comments through there. We may not be able to answer all the questions today, but they will become part of the meeting record. At today's meeting, we will be taking verbal public comment, but you can submit public comments through our comment form online on our website or by emailing districtcommission@portlandoregon.gov. And if you're joining our meeting today in person at the Portland Building, there's staff in person that can help you access interpretation. And with that, I will pass it back to our co-chair to go over tonight's agenda.
Quite
And
literally,
Adam,
passing it back. Go ahead.
can you also advance the slide so that we're able to follow along?
I think
Thank you.
7 meetings in, we would have figured it out. We're in a new room this evening, so Sophia and Adam have been doing a great job with some last minute switcheroos here. So thank you for those Zoom logistics, Adam. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to continue gathering and synthesizing community input and also to continue the process of narrowing the maps that we are looking at. For our agenda, which you can see on the screen, we will begin with commission business, hear a community engagement update, and then take verbal testimony. Following public comment, we will spend some time doing share outs from work groups that happened last week. So for context for those watching, last week the commissioners had the option to meet in one of 3 small work groups, no more than 5 commissioners, to have small group discussions about how we might narrow the maps we have all been looking at together. And the purpose of those work groups was to help us in the process of starting to coalesce around a set of maps to share with the public at the end of the month, and also to avoid hopefully having another full commission meeting next week. So you will hear from the 3 work groups, which were hosted by current and past co-chairs, Commissioners Lumley, Van Sickle-Robbins, and me, and each of us will report out on our work group discussions in the latter part of the agenda. After the share outs, we'll take a quick break, and then we will shift to reviewing our updated sample maps. So again, the purpose of tonight's meeting is really to narrow the number of maps, hopefully to a very small number that we would like to vote on, and then release to the public for the public hearings this summer by the end of the month. Any questions about the agenda before we dive in? Hearing none, I will pass it to Autumn to facilitate our meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. So we have 1 excused absence today, and that is Commissioner Baldini. We also have 2 items on the table for business, and that's approving the minutes from both April 19th and May 3rd. So just as a reminder, the minutes for the 19th were not ready at the last meeting, so that's why we're doing two at once. So we'll start with April 19th. Are there any proposed changes to the minutes or any questions that we need to clarify? Okay, do I see any opposition to approving the minutes as is? Great, those are approved. So we'll move on to May 3rd. Are there any questions or proposed edits to the minutes from May 3rd? Okay, seeing none.
Can I just say
Commissioner
that,
Lundy?
yeah, on both of these sets of minutes, there are very minor grammatical changes, and it's okay if the staff make those changes as long as it doesn't change the content of the messaging. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so is there any opposition to approving the minutes as is, barring any typos or grammatical errors? Okay, those will pass, and we'll also do a more thorough review of those to try to catch them before finalizing. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So that is the commission business. I will pass it back to Adam, I think literally, to go over engagement by the numbers and community engagement efforts to date. Adam?
Thanks, Autumn. So yeah, engagement by the numbers. So far to date, the Independent District Commission has 148 folks that are receiving the monthly email updates. And encourage folks to sign up for that on our website if you are not yet and watching at home. The number of public comments received by the IDC is 114. We have had 162 maps submitted through the District R platform so far, and I've offered 3 hours time of verbal public comment. The number of public meetings and public hearings we've had is 10, and we've had attendance of 495 people at those events. We've had 4 District R trainings so far and had 28 folks participate in those and submit some maps as well, which is great. And we held a listening session on Monday that 40 people outside of commission and commission volunteers that were facilitating attended and got some great feedback on our community questions survey. We now have 70 of those surveys completed, and we'll cover some of the main points that folks have been talking about in those in a second. And commissioners have had filled out 14 stakeholder conversation forms when you're talking out in the community, and that's with various stakeholder organizations in Portland. As far as key themes from the survey, with the 4 questions for community and the listening sessions, big one that came up.
Excuse me, Adam, there's a hand up. Commissioner Flishman.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I was wondering if there was a way to, if it was possible to identify of those folks who are on our email list, those that are actually representing organizations beyond themselves being on this, because that's a really important communication vehicle if an organizational representative is monitoring this and then passing it along. So I was wondering whether you had any sense about that or how to be able to identify that.
There are definitely, we could go back and look through the list itself, but there's definitely a good number of people that represent those community stakeholder organizations on the distribution list. And also when we have folks sign up through some of the various platforms, we do ask, people can, when they give public comment, they can sign up for the email list as well. And usually when they're giving that public comment, they specify whether or not they're representing an organization when they give the public comment. So we've received a number of public comments and in turn email subscribers that way that are representative of the stakeholder organizations. I don't know the exact number off of the top of my head, but it's something that we can look into and send out to the group.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But back to key themes from the survey and listening session. Geographic proximity. Many participants emphasize the importance of proximity in defining their community. They describe their community as areas that can be reached within a 20 to 30-minute walk from home without being limited by physical boundaries like the Willamette River. And the sense of belonging and connection to the neighborhood was often associated with the ability to access amenities, services, and social gatherings within walking distance. Neighborhood boundaries. Existing neighborhood associations and neighborhood boundaries themselves were mentioned as representatives of the community and platforms for organized neighborhood activism. Participants highlighted the importance of working together on various initiatives such as block parties, street fairs, emergency preparedness, to foster a sense of community and address common concerns. Community facilities and amenities. The availability of community facilities and amenities within walking distance, such as parks, libraries, grocery stores, food carts, movie theaters, etc., was highlighted as important for residents who do not have cars. Churches and events were also mentioned as contributors to a sense of community, and even if not within immediate walking distance, folks did really look to those amenities as part of their community. Rivers, natural areas, and landmarks contribute to physical landscape and community. Here. The Willamette and Columbia Rivers, Forest Park, Oaks Bottoms, and specific bridges are what were mentioned a lot as significant features that folks were talking about with this one. Socioeconomic factors were mentioned, including considerations for older adults who may require senior facilities and recognizing the duration of residency in the neighborhood. The participants acknowledged the diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds within their communities and expressed concerns about ensuring inclusivity and avoiding the disenfranchisement of certain groups. Continuing with some key themes, transportation access and infrastructure. The need for convenient transportation options and improved infrastructure, including public transit, sidewalks, and bike lanes is frequently mentioned as a criterion for defining districts. East Side representation. Residents from the East Side express a sentiment being left out and advocate for the inclusion of their perspectives and needs in district boundary decisions. They seek fair representation and participation in the process. Unique community needs. Some neighborhoods have unique needs based on their geographical features, such as hills or lack of sidewalks. And participants urge consideration of these specific needs when drawing district boundaries. Cultural and historical significance came up a lot as well. Participants emphasize the importance of maintaining neighborhood names, cultural identities, and historical significance of certain communities. Splitting neighbors or communities based on long-standing boundaries is seen as potentially negative for that community representation. And inclusivity and service accessibility. Participants emphasize the importance of keeping walkable neighborhoods with essential services together. They advocate for the presence of greenways, gathering places, and accessible services throughout the world. The needs of residents in sheltered tiny home villages are also highlighted in some of these survey responses.
Commissioner Van Sickle, Robin.
I also wanted to add, I didn't hear you talk about school districts and school enrollment areas. And I know in our breakout session at the listening session, that was pretty universally commented on, especially for parents, families, grandparents who are in neighborhoods. They do a lot of school activities, after school activities, so it came up quite a bit.
I would just say that also these notes are just the high level themes, right, from Monday. We haven't had a long time to really go through all the fine tune all the notes. So that definitely is a theme. And I'm sure there's other things we might have missed. So we'll be doing a more thorough report for you all. I hope to have that for you next week.
I would say we do have, I think we do have 10 more minutes before public comment is scheduled to start. So we have a little bit more time in this section. So for anyone who did attend the listening sessions among the commissioners that wants to share some thoughts or have just anything that's been coalescing after that, I think this is a good time to do it. And also, if you've had discussions with other members of the community and you want to lift up some of the themes you're hearing there, I think this is a perfect time to do it as well. So I'll invite that. Commissioner Lumley, would you start us off?
Yeah, thank you. I also heard the same thing about school district boundaries. And I think there also might be some misunderstanding about what the districts could do. Some of the comments I heard where they were worried about their school kids being moved from one school or another, but that's actually an entirely different district boundary. That's a public school boundary issue, not something that would take place as a part of our work here on the Independent District Commission or the authority and role of future elected officials in the city of Portland. So, but it came up several times, and I would agree that that's a consideration. I also have been having several conversations with community-based organizations, and I'm feeling a theme there. And some of it came up in the listening session, but I'm also feeling a theme that the location of major headquarters or the headquarters of major community-based organizations is important to community consideration. And there are several in the Portland area. I left that up. I also could give a report out on several of the groups that I talked to. Would that be time to do that, or would you rather do that later?
We did switch the order a little bit. I think now, because we have the time and we're on this topic, I think it's okay to do it now rather than saving it for the end of public comment.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. On May 8th, I met with the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable, which is a group of tribal organizations, tribes, and governmental agencies that have Native programs. And I discovered the same kind of comments that I'd heard when I met with the Native American Youth and Family Center on May 1, that the Coley neighborhood is something that is of quite a bit of interest for the Native community, and want to see that split, including the area on 42nd Avenue on both sides. I also heard that there was a business district, several Native businesses in the area of Hawthorne and Division along Cesar Chavez Boulevard as well. Something I learned. On the 15th, I met with the Urban League, and they had a strong interest in protecting, obviously, the Albina district now, and as well as the northeast area where there's a fairly significant African-American population and important history of where they were gentrified and moved out of the community. There's significant interest in keeping the Lloyd district, the North district, and not moved into a downtown area, as well as the area that is north of the Banfield and west of the Willamette River. Making sure that's kept in the North district. They also said I asked if they'd be interested in hosting a public hearing in July, and they recommended Youth in Action and the Roseway Initiative Building. Self Enhancement Incorporated or Kairos would be good locations. On the 15th, I also met with the Coalition Communities of Color CEO Marcus Monday, and we focused on what is now sample map 10. And he, because he really liked that map, and because it kept the Lloyd district and that area next to it in the north area, and it protected the Albina Vision and the African American community in north and northeast. He also talked about the importance of keeping the east side whole, because there's not only a large African American community out there, but also other communities of color, and an area that has been underserved in the city for quite some time, and believes that city services have not been just or fair in that area. On the 15th, I met with representatives from IRCO, the Immigrant Refugee and Community Organization, and they were definitely interested in the east side being kept whole, because they have a lot of immigrant and refugee community that is in that area. There's also an immigrant community near the Columbia River in the Kenton neighborhood, and a Slavic community several members live in the Argay Terrace and North Gresham neighborhoods. They have a headquarters that's and also Africa House. So Orco headquarters and Africa House are very near 102nd Avenue. And there's another headquarters. They have Pacific Island Asian Family Center, which is located on Sandy and 81st Avenue, which is in South Side. And they're very interested in making sure that all three of these are in the same East Side district. When asked if they'd be willing to host, they said yes, and they preferred a Saturday in July for a public hearing. Thank you. That's my report. And I'll be sure to send this in formally.
You knew exactly what I was going to ask. So I know that was probably a lot of information. Some of it was more logistical in terms of outreach and community engagement. Those notes are going to go to the staff in terms of scheduling potential locations. And then Commissioner Lumley and any other commissioner that maybe has specific map-based factors that may come in terms of lines as we're doing the exercise and looking at maps. If it becomes relevant and you have specific examples like that, I'd ask you to raise them as well, especially if we're looking at a map and you want folks to factor in that consideration. I see heads nodding, so that's good. And then I know, Adam, I know you were ready to kind of go with public comment. Are there any other thoughts or themes that may have come up in the listening session that we haven't kind of surfaced today and reported out on, or anything else that you're hearing that you just want to amplify? Perfect. Commissioner Chisholm. Commissioner. Perfect.
Yes, I spoke today with Duncan Huang, who's a community development manager at Apano. He's also an elected Metro councilor. And he's been soliciting feedback from the AAPI community, and in particular, those folks who live and work and own businesses in and around the Jade District. He wanted us to know that the Jade District, of course, is in their minds a more expansive place than what is formally defined by the city as the Jade Business District. And in particular, they were encouraging us to consider a southern border. We're gonna get into maps later, but if there's a central east side district and then an outer east side district, to consider the border basically at where the Lentz neighborhood boundary is along East 82nd. I talked to him about other, sort of what happens north of there, but in particular, he was concerned about wanting to have it at 82nd, which would include most of the API community, sort of the dense blocks east of there in the East District, but includes some still west of 82nd that would give them access to engaging with a broader selection of the city council. We did talk a lot about whether the district ought to then shift the line shift a little bit west to include the formal Jade District, and he appreciated my concern of including that, which means sliding the line out to like 79th or so. There are definitely a lot of folks engaging with this process outside of our formal process, and it was really great to hear that they are engaging and activating and having conversations and sharing that feedback with all of us. I did submit that exact feedback this morning to the staff SurveyMonkey form.
Thank you. And following the public comment section, we may have a bit of time, just depending on how many members of the community do to share with us. So we'll also have time for additional reflections based on what you hear then as well. Okay, Adam, we'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Autumn. We are now going to take public comment. Community members have had the opportunity to sign up to testify in advance of the district on the district commission's website. So we're going to call on those folks first who have signed up, and if we have time left on the at the end of the folks that signed up, we will allow folks in the Zoom to testify on a hand raised basis. If you haven't signed up to testify and would like to testify, just use that Zoom hand or drop it in the Q&A. When it's your turn to testify, we will bring you into the main room and you will have 3 minutes to share your thoughts. And you'll just get an invite to become a webinar panelist. You just click OK. And please manage your own time. There is a timer on the screen. If you are testifying in person, please find the district commission staff and we will call on. Have anybody in the crowd tonight? And with that, pass it to Sophia to call.
Thanks, Adam. So I just put in the order in the chat. So the first will be Marianne, then we'll go to Kennedy, Jennifer, and then we'll go to Vadim, Jeremy, and Stefan. So Marianne, you should have gotten a notification. So please accept that so you can come in. There you are. Welcome. Let me start the timer for you and the floor will be yours. Go ahead. You can go ahead, Marianne.
Oh, thank you. So my name is Marianne Fitzgerald, and I'm supplementing the written testimony that I submitted on May 3rd regarding boundaries. I recommend that you follow the Portland Comprehensive Plan districts, which separated the central city from western neighborhoods, from eastern neighborhoods, and inner neighborhoods and industrial neighborhoods. The Willamette River has been a dividing boundary since the city was formed, and I'm particularly concerned about what a nightmare it is to cross the bridges during rush hour. I'm concerned that the size of the districts will not make it easier or convenient to attend meetings in our district. So please consider travel time when you're looking at the centers of the districts. I live in a western neighborhood, but my neighborhood does not reflect the stereotype demographics that you were discussing at your last meeting. My single family home has a real market value that is lower than the Portland median value, but my property taxes are pretty high relative to the market value. It's primarily a residential neighborhood, but we're working with other community groups to cite both a multicultural hub and affordable housing within the West Portland Town Center. My neighborhood has no sidewalks, no bike paths, and very little transit. We spend a lot of our volunteer time trying to advocate for improvements, but we're not likely to get any of them built over the next 10 years. Even though we have, where my children attend school is some of the highest multicultural district in Southwest Portland. It's very hard to convince people that are making decisions that there are people of low incomes and people of color living in Southwest Portland. My neighborhood has only one playground structure and no public schools. The elementary and middle schools are on the other side of I-5, as is the library. So please don't use I-5 as a boundary in the districts. I recommend that you keep the Willamette River as the boundary and not the freeways on the west side. We have a passion to preserve trees and a passion to protect water quality because of the terrain and the presence of a lot of creeks in our and water quality limited creeks in our neighborhoods. We don't have community gathering places other than the parks, the schools, and the library. City of Portland has chosen not to locate a city-funded community center, but we have to pay for meeting space in the Multnomah Arts Center and in the Southwest Community Center. But our neighbors care a lot about each other. We have formed neighborhood watches long before that program was discontinued by a previous commissioner. We host neighborhood night out every year in the park in our community. And we have neighborhood emergency teams that take care of people, whether it's a snowstorm or preparing for the big Cascadia earthquake. You know, we have a lot of people who check in on each other and really care a lot. So we have only one grocery store nearby that's locally owned.
Marianne,
Yes,
we'll have to pause you there. The time is fast.
okay. I'll spin
Thank
it
you,
right. Thank you. Bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I ask real quickly what district neighborhood you live in?
I live in Southwest Portland in the Crestwood neighborhood.
Thank you.
I'm 3 houses from Tigard, and the city has called my neighborhood North Tigard in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. And by the way, before we go to the next speaker, I did want to note that we're going to work to keep any follow-ups to question items of clarification, like where do you live or do you represent an organization, but not something that kind of expands the actual comment itself.
Thank you, Autumn. So up next we have Kendi. Kendi, we're trying to bring you up, bring you in the room. Are you?
Oh, no.
Yeah, in the,
Okay. Perfect, go ahead.
awesome. I just kind of wanted to reaffirm the commission's attempts to bring in East County into the discussion, or East Portland, and also kind of talk about the key school districts that I think kind of, I would say, like, are considered like outer East County, specifically Reynolds, Centennial, Park Rose, and David Douglas. I would say I'm a recent Reynolds graduate, and I would just like to add that all of those school districts probably have the least access to, public transit in the city. And I think that there's a lot of room to kind of talk about that, especially in terms of, being able to get transportation to get to different district meetings when they're eventually split up. And I just wanted to commend the work so far that's been done in terms of getting that representation, and kind of highlight those areas as specifically like outer East County. Yeah, thank you so much. I've grown up over out in the deep Portland, outer East Portland area, Gresham area, my whole life. And yeah, I've been very happy to hear this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Kendi. Up next, we have Jennifer.
Thank you so much. My name is Jennifer Parrish Taylor. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy at the Urban League of Portland. I will not go over the boundaries that we were recommending, as Commissioner Lumley already uplifted those. But what I will say is that I work for a culturally specific organization, meaning that our entire function as an organization exists solely to address and respond to institutional racism as we work to stabilize African Americans and other Oregonians. Most of our staff is Black, including members of the board, executive leadership, management, direct service staff, contractors, and even our vendors, from our janitorial crew, photographers, designers, et cetera, et cetera. We are an integral part, of the community, both community-based and community-led, by a community deeply impacted by injustice and economic oppression. And while I know you cannot and will not draft districts maps according to race, for me, being specific when it comes to my community is important. For the communities that we represent, the process of district mapping is one of equity and inclusion, and that with drawing the new boundaries, it is our hope that these new lines will not separate communities but bring them closer together, especially as it pertains to the communities of common interest. We encourage commissioners to study the city's history and how boundary lines in the past, once inscribed in statute, dictated the places my communities could and could not go. And we are still dealing with the consequences of those decisions today. We would ask you to take into consideration the impacts gentrification and the cost of being priced out of our ancestral communities has had on many of Portland's Black residents, because for far too long, the current system has forced communities of color to make pragmatic choices when it comes to leadership and policy decisions. And as a city, we now have an opportunity to change that. And lastly, there are many things that connect people. We hope that the commission will consider the full picture of what makes a certain area unique and cohesive. And additionally, we would ask that you think about what's not being said tonight, who's not in the room and why, what voices are not here, and what barriers to access they might be encountering that limit their participation in this process. If we want to see a city that is more equitable and welcoming to all, we must be intentional about the choices we make. Portlanders are counting on you to help shape the future of our city and how communities engage not only with local government, but with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Up next, we have Vadim Sersky. I don't see Vadim on the call, so we'll go with Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Hart. I'm the Jade District Community Development Coordinator at Apano. Tonight, I'll be sharing on behalf of the Jade District Steering Committee, as well as neighborhood-focused staff at Apano. We would like to support the splitting of the Jade District along the boundaries following 82nd Avenue. While we appreciate the goal of not splitting up the communities of concern, we also recognize the complexity of differences between communities living on either side of 82nd. The steering committee agreed that Jade District aligned closely with many of the areas of growth consistent throughout East Portland. For example, improving public safety, access to public transportation, improving environmental justice concerns and access to green spaces, as well as furthering economic development. However, they also noted that due to the close proximity to the natural boundary where we see economic and social demographics begin to shift, the Jade District is at a particularly high risk of involuntary displacement. We feel that the Jade District we feel that splitting the Jade District will allow us to more accurately represent the needs of our residents, and we look forward to working with future city commissioners to address the previously mentioned concerns. Thank you, everyone.
Commissioner Chisholm?
Yeah, Jeremy, just wanted to make sure that we're understanding precisely your comment. When you say Jade District, are you talking about the formal city-defined Jade Business District or the broader zone around it that is disproportionately high populations of AAPI residents?
That's a really good question, and that's something that we talked a lot about with the steering committee. I guess so. Our work with Jade District, you know, we're not really confined to the official like city boundaries that our big business district falls into. So like the communities that we're engaging with on like a daily basis, they're a little bit outside, even though, you know, officially the Jade District only goes about 3 blocks west of 82nd.
Thank you. That comports very much with what Duncan Huang told me this morning. Yep, thank you.
Commissioner Maharis?
Jeremy, can I request that you submit maybe a drafted map follow-up, just so that I'm very clear as I was hearing you describe the district, to make sure my understanding connects with what you're describing. Would really appreciate that.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Where should I send that to?
Jeremy, we can follow up with you and give you the detailed instructions if that works.
Yeah, that would be great.
Up next is for public comment is someone who's not here, Stephen Brooks. So this is kind of a time for anyone else who's out there viewing our meeting. If you'd like to testify, let us know by raising your virtual Zoom hand or putting it in the Q&A. So kind of last call for verbal testimony. Not seeing any, so Autumn, I might kick it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you to all of the community members who did attend today and shared your public comment. And as a note, thank you to all of the commissioners who've also been doing reach out very intentionally to different groups and individuals within communities, and for all the other comments that have come to the commission in various forms, written, verbal, listening sessions. So thank you. So before we move to the report out from the working groups, I wanted to give a little bit of space to reflect on any of the comments that you heard today, or that broader set of comments. And then we will move into discussing kind of the bigger themes as you reflected them in some initial draft maps. Okay.
Just for
Commissioner Lumley.
Point of verification, I'm not quite sure if I heard you. Did you say you want us to reflect on public comment? Or
This
just
public,
general?
so public comment that we just heard, anything else, anything that stood out to you, anything that you want to raise up, or just if there were any other final reflections that you've had from the other community engagement efforts, now would be the time to share before we move to the next section.
Well, I really want to thank Jeremy Hart for testifying his testimony today, because many of the map iterations that we're considering, and especially those keeping the east side whole, have the Jade District right on the boundary. And having this kind of clarity is going to make it so much easier for us moving forward. And so, I sincerely thank Jeremy for his testimony, and also Apano for organizing tonight. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lumley, and we'll have comments starting with Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, followed by Commissioner Manhattan and Commissioner Chisholm. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins.
I just wanted to thank Jennifer Parrish Taylor for the comments that she made. And I was going to report out that I have been speaking with Rakaya Adams about her perspective and the perspective that drove the work that she has done with Albina Vision Trust. And that she will be doing going forward about preserving Lower Albina and historic Albina boundaries, and also to not forget that there was an official city of East Portland back in the day, and to think about what those boundaries looked like at the time that was a community.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manhattan, that hand was down intentionally, right?
It was, and I was sorry, I had to
No
reflect
problem.
when you said my name, I put it down. No, I appreciate that. I just wanted to, I appreciate you asking for reflections. Just want to appreciate Marianne Fitzgerald, who spoke about her experience in West Portland. I know that we had talked a lot about the West Side and particularly the West Hills, and just appreciate her taking the time to elevate the income disparity that exists in some of those communities. And I would just, in reflecting on the survey responses that have come through and different conversations that I've had with folks about what they understand as community in terms of access to services and amenities, I'd be curious to know for some of those folks who are in pockets of what may seem like more affluent areas, where they do, play, shop, hang out, like what that actually looks like for folks. So definitely encouraging folks to, it's just help. I just realized I'm more of a visual learner. So as folks are describing their experience and submitting public comment in written format, even just like a color pencil map is really helpful for me to understand those pieces so that we can match that back to some of the maps that we're going to be looking at this stage. But I think that as we're thinking about outreach also in those areas and what the communities or areas we might prioritize for folks on the West Side or in some of those areas that may seem like obvious affluent districts, making sure that we're making it accessible to those lower income communities, I think is important. So just wanted to appreciate that comment. I definitely learned something from what she shared.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know we're all learning so much throughout the process, so thank you for uplifting and amplifying that too. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, I just want to also, first of all, thank all the people, everyone who submitted public comment, but in particular, talk a little bit about what Jeremy Hart was saying about the broader J district. I started this process sort of obsessed with the school district boundaries, and David Douglas School District that zigs particularly and zags through Montevilla. And then we heard folks say, well, Montevilla is really important. They want to stay together. So I started thinking about that boundary of the neighborhood district boundary. And now we're hearing about the J district and particularly the broader zone around the J district, particularly to its south and its east. We can't draw a map that holds to the David Douglas boundary and the Montevilla neighborhood boundary and the David Douglas formal or informal boundaries. Those are all overlapping places. And so for me, it's been a process of really trying to figure out what matters to me the most, what I think is going to best reflect a sense of community. I think about that David Douglas bit and thinking, well, if an East Portland commissioner or commissioners, they're not going to stop caring about David Douglas School District. We lose 7 city blocks of it to a central district. So understanding and figuring out how to overlap these communities of interest and how hard the formal boundaries need to be respected versus sort of the broader zones of where folks live and shop and play and work has been a very interesting challenge for all of us. And I would encourage anyone in the public who has additional comment to share with us about that, to do that in this process and in our July public hearings, because this is a lot of fun and we're all learning a lot about our city. Keep jumping in my car and driving out neighborhoods and trying to understand where we are. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. Last calls for any reflections before we move to the work group report out and discussion. Okay, we'll have also plenty of time for discussion as well. No, Commissioner Siegel, I see you.
I'll keep it quick. I think three things that I took notes on as we were listening to the testimony tonight. One of them had to do with paying some attention to the major policy action known as the Central City Plan and its boundaries. It's a multi-year, it's like the East Portland Plan, a multi-year effort involving a whole lot of people, and set some pretty interesting policy. And so I think that's something to help keep in mind when looking at district boundaries. It was loud and clear, not only in our listening sessions, but also tonight. Socioeconomic factors are important and should be given importance to district boundary setting. And without going into a lot of detail on that. And another thing that I thought was interesting, heard it for the first time today. I heard about walkable neighborhoods, 20-minute neighborhoods, et cetera, in previous testimony in the listening session, et cetera. But two people brought up tonight travel time of getting from the center of the district to the rest of the district. So when it comes time to participate in public discussions or public meetings, to kind of keep that in mind as well. Is it a manageable distance? And are there ways can you get there from here when it comes to participation in this whole effort and moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we're about to move into the, so there were, as a reminder for the public, and for all of you in the room who did the work, 3 work groups met over the last week. Each current or former co-chair led each group. This evening, we're going to allot up to 15 minutes per group to report out on your discussions. I believe each of the co-chairs is going to focus on at least giving a high-level report out, but other members, some of the groups may have other members facilitating or jumping in at different points. But I'd like to reserve at least 15 to 20 and up to 30 minutes or so for broader discussion. So what we'll do is we'll have the groups go in order from how they met. So that would be Commissioner Hansen's group first, followed by Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, followed by Commissioner Lumley. And we'll hold the broader discussion. We'll try to hold the broader discussion until the end to be able to reflect on what each group said and then find some synthesis or points that we need to discuss further. So Commissioner Hansen, can you start us off? And
I can indeed, and I have raised my hand, so I am in the top prime spot.
Gotcha.
Since my voice and face are separate. And I will caveat this by saying that my work group met, or the work group that I convened met a full week ago, and to what was just mentioned, our thoughts and opinions change very quickly. So the caveat is that this was a week ago, and this is where we were a week ago. And I think there's a lot of still good stuff in here, and also things have definitely shifted since then with additional comments, for example, the Jade District, since we just heard. So last Wednesday, Commissioners Kimura, Judd, Chisholm, Saxena, and I met. We had a wide-ranging conversation. We looked at the list of sample maps from the previous meeting. We started the conversation with Commissioner Chisholm walking us through some changes that he had made to map number 7, and I'll share a visual in a moment, but I'll walk through the conversation first. The map that had the west side that popped over the river to include Lloyd, thank you, to include Lloyd with the central city with the west side. He had kind of shifted that map around so it looks more like a map number 11, which we'll look at later today, that has Lloyd with north and northeast, so doesn't split Albina. And so we had that as part of the conversation. And then we really shifted the conversation to looking at some of these map options side by side, looking at a set of maps that illustrates various options, thinking about wanting to propose a small handful to the community. So looking at maps side by side that shows those options. And then thirdly, we discussed developing a list of specific questions to pose to community members. So even kind of converting what the different maps do into specific questions. So even if we narrow the maps further, the questions still remain. And a lot of these questions will be familiar. So we narrowed it down to 4, and I'm going to screen share here. Can I get a thumbs up that you can see that? Actually, I can see what you can see. Look at this. Okay.
And
go ahead.
Commissioner, I know that you're not going to do it, but can I just do a reminder that we're going to, if you've nicknamed maps in your work groups, can you refer to them by their official sample numbers just so everyone stays on the same page?
Absolutely. Thank you for that flag. So to clockwise from the bottom left, we had maps 6, which is on the bottom left, 8, which is on the top left, 9, although this is like a slightly older version of the current version of number 9, which has the East Portland line a little smoother. And then, one moment, rearranging my screen, map number 11. So as I also said in the center, and we liked the idea of looking at the 4 of these together, because looking at them as a set, for example, we've got 2 that keep the central city together and 2 that don't. We've got 1 that jumps the map at, or jumps the river at St. John's, 2, I believe, in Selwood, 1 that just takes the Willamette the whole way down. All of them keep the east side pretty consistent. So again, thinking about narrowing, thinking about a set of maps that might elicit certain responses. And the other thing, as I mentioned, that we talked about is coming up with this list of questions that we would pose alongside the map, which if it's probably small font in the middle there, but what those questions generally say are things like, how do we best serve East Portland? How do we best serve the central city? How can we be thoughtful about keeping together historic Albina, which was split by the building of I-5? How do we respond to the fact that less than a quarter of the city's population lives west of the river? How do we keep non-PPS school districts together? And also questions like, how do we address the issue of undercounting in the census, which had come up in one of our early meetings, but we haven't talked a ton about since. So again, a couple of kind of closing comments from our conversation. We've talked about the importance of clean lines. So when we share these out for public comment, people can easily digest them instead of having, so the one on the top right is a really good example of that versus the updated version 9, which has like a cleaner line so people don't get kind of nitpicky about squiggles. We also talked about creating consistency around commonalities among the different maps that we end up sharing with the public. So for example, we know we want to keep East Portland together. So suggesting that the lines for East Portland be basically consistent across the different maps. So the eye and goes to the differences and so people can react to the differences. And we were sort of approaching this narrowing process as wanting to offer a handful of maps that were in conversation with each other so we could best engage the community in June and July with a couple of maps that kind of offer different answers to those questions. So with that, I will open it to the rest of the work group to see if there is anything that folks want to add or anything that I missed.
That was a great summary. Nothing to add.
Trying to check how many members were in your group. Commissioner.
It would be Commissioner Kimura or Commissioner Judd. Anything to add?
Great summary.
Yeah, nothing, nothing further. That was an amazing summation.
Commissioner Kimura?
Okay, I do want to make sure that we all understand that there's going to be some adjustment. But I think that we're accepting of the fact that there's tweaks and adjustments. But I think what we generally look at is the broad outlines and the consistency of how we apply our reasoning. And I think that that is important to me, so that we have, there's no standard of application, but there should be some consistency of thought and how we apply those different dynamics to different groups. And I think it's important that we try very hard to make sure that that is a process that we applaud. We also recognize that at the edges, there's always going to be some adjustment, and we accept that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, I will also add to that the theme that as a broader group, IDC group, we should be really focused on getting the feedback as we are and ensuring that community members have the best opportunity to put their fingerprints on these boundaries. And while we are coming through, and one of the reasons why we emphasize going to the community with these questions is because that it gives us an opportunity to get that feedback. And so just wanted to reemphasize that that was a strong theme within our group, to go to the community to get their opinions on these questions and those fine tunings of the edges.
Thank you, Commissioner Judd. Commissioner Chisholm?
I just want to elevate something that Commissioner Kimura said in our group that I've been reflecting on a lot, which is, it's really easy to get kind of obsessive about bringing the population differences between the 4 districts down as narrow as possible. I spent countless hours moving one census block around and another just to try and get to exactly the right number. And she reminded us that the job here, we need to have roughly equal districts. We're not required to be that precise. And the real job here is to identify community and to draw maps that make sense to the public. And so to be a little less obsessive about perfecting the exact number of people, because it leads you to making sort of odd choices that don't make sense to the public. You can imagine if you had a map that had a boundary on Sandy Boulevard, but because you're obsessed about the numbers, as I have been, you throw 3 blocks on the other side to the other side. And then people wonder what crazy thing are they trying to do? Are they gerrymandering something? Is there a conspiracy afoot? And we undermine confidence in the system. I may be going a little bit beyond what Commissioner Kimura said, but I've taken that to heart and really focused first and foremost on community and less on the obsessing about the numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that Commissioner Sexton, I think you said you didn't have anything to add. I'll go right back around. Anything else?
Yeah, no, I'll just, just to echo what Commissioner Chisholm said, and just, what Commissioner Kimura strongly reminded us is to create maps, and also Commissioner Judd, in collaboration with community that reflect the general shapes, because the edges will be shifting, and every 10 years we'll be looking at them again. But what we're trying to do now is to get the general configuration right in strong collaboration with community.
Thank you, commissioners. All right. Let's move to Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins. Now I know that your group mate is
Small but
excused today.
mighty.
Small but mighty.
Yeah.
You looked it up.
And Commissioner Baldini is not here this evening, but we have collaborated on what I'm going to report out. So we started our work group by looking at the questions that the first work group had created and thought about what we might add to that. And we added to that a question about how we would prioritize keeping school districts intact in a zone. And what about high school enrollment areas? Because we had heard a lot from public comment about the schools as a neighborhood hub. We talked about how we should prioritize keeping neighborhood boundaries intact. And we also talked about some things like what are the advantages to keeping, for instance, all the Port of Portland property in a single zone versus splitting it into 2 zones? Could that potentially provide 6 city council members who would be working with their constituents to ensure that the port is a good neighbor, making choices that are in service of the communities around them? And that same question, asking that same question could be applied to other larger scale city assets. And then what we did is we decided that before we started diving into specific maps, we would talk about the kind of characteristics, or in essence, the kind of filters we would use to evaluate different maps. Although we weren't really trying to get to a single map, we were just trying to get to a set of things that would help us decide whether we thought one map or another did more to honor those characteristics. And those included preserving an outer east side in a single zone. The question of dividing the 2035 Central District into multiple zones versus keeping it in a single zone. What were the pros and cons of those choices? How we would preserve the Jade District, even though obviously there'll be around the edges kind of interpretation and iterative kind of work that will have to be done in the mapping. We talked about where the west side would cross the river, and we leaned toward having it cross the river in the south, in the Selwood, Westmoreland, Eastmoreland, Reed area. We were trying to preserve school districts and high school boundaries to the degree possible. As Commissioner Chisholm says, there's give and take that's going to happen on all of these elements. And we wanted to preserve neighborhood boundaries to the degree possible. So we looked at that as we were looking at maps. It ended up that 2 of the maps that Commissioner Hansen's work group had looked at, the super cool map and number 9, they shared a lot of characteristics, and those were maps that Commissioner Baldini and I had created. So we merged those, and we've worked with Flo to modify that, and it's now the sample map 9 that is in the queue. And we also agreed with the first work group that it made sense to have multiple maps. I don't know whether that's 2 or 3 or 4, but anyway, multiple maps to present for public feedback during June and July that will give us the best outcome in terms of getting a lot of community feedback on the different choices that we could make. And I would invite Commissioner Baldini to comment, but she's not here, so that is my report.
I hear her from somewhere saying, what a great job. What a great report. Thank you, Commissioner. So I think that leaves Commissioner Lumley. You convene a group, and your group members were, just had them, Commissioners Fleischman, Green, Lorente, and Siegel. You start us off, and then the
Thank
others
you.
can jump in.
Yeah, that sounds good. We met on a very sunny, beautiful Saturday morning. It felt like the first day of summer, and we ended a little bit early, which was nice. We started out by having a conversation about the Jade District and the Central City 2035 plan, and also the questions from the first group, which was very helpful. Then we started focusing on maps that had the west side and where to bring in parts of the east side. The 3 that we looked at were 7, 9, and 10. 7 keeps the sort of central east side or renters district into the west side. Sample 9 has the lower southeast area, that's sort of the Selwood Eastmoreland area, into the west side. And then what is now map 10, which is a little bit of both of those areas into the west side. Then we had a conversation about map themes, and it looked like the maps that we were all leaning towards had 3 districts that bordered along the southern city boundary. And then we talked about how we're going to get to a conclusion this month to submit maps for public comment. And we have sort of 2 options. One is to submit maps just for the purpose of soliciting comment. But there wouldn't necessarily be a viable map that could reach anything close to a consensus. So our preference was to submit maps that the commission could actually reach something close to a consensus on. So we started talking about map attributes and those that we thought would not meet that test, and that included maps that split St. John's or bringing the St. John's area into a West district, and maps that include the downtown in a northern district. Then we also talked about maps with a central district. And while we're supportive of map options that have a central district, we were concerned that there are way too many trade-offs with those kinds of map attributes that we were not likely to reach something close to a consensus, because it appeared to require splitting the West District or splitting the East District or bringing the St. John's into the West District. And there were communities of common interest issues, substantial issues with those map configurations. So we got to the point where we wanted to bring this up for conversation tonight about if we could narrow it down by considering those map attributes that should no longer be considered. And so that's where we ended. And I look forward to hearing from other participants, but the ones we seem to be honing in on more are maps 7, 9, and 10. Other commissioners who participated, you're welcome to jump in.
Thanks, Co-Chair Lemon. Okay. Let's see, I think it was, all right, perfect. Commissioner Manjarrez, you want to start us off?
Yes, I'm not a worker, but I'm clarifying question. So I'm looking at map 7, Commissioner Lumley, and it pulls the downtown area into a northern district. So that seems to conflict with what you just mentioned about maps that do that and not really finding synergy there.
I think you mean map 8.
So, sorry, Commissioner Manjarrez, can you repeat where was the map coming further down south?
Sorry,
I was looking at map 7. Oh, maybe, I'm sorry. Yes, I think I looked at map 8 on one thing and my bad. I clicked on 7, but I was looking at 8.
Yeah,
And I was trying to explain that, man. I was on mute. So, had a great speech, great answer. I did see Commissioner Siegel's hand up a little bit ago.
I missed that, Commissioner Siegel.
No problem. I think Commissioner Lumley, I mean, you did a great job of summing it up, and I don't think there's a need to repeat comment after comment. I think it's important to have a couple of maps, a small number, 1 or 2, to generate discussion at the upcoming public hearings. The hearings will be of much more use if we have the questions teed up to which we want responses. And then it's also going to be incumbent upon us and important for us to figure out, all right, so we've heard this in response to these questions. What are we going to do about it? And how does that advance the ball, if you will, towards getting us to refining a final map? So that's just kind of that's not really a reflection on what our working group did. It's more of as we move forward and with hopefully 1 or 2 maps. The next step being, so what do we want to ask about them that we're going to find that will help us do our refinement.
Thanks, Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Fleischman?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to commend Commissioner Lumley because we were able to, through the discussion, even though we ended early, but he's implying that we ended like really early. It was like 10 minutes early. That we were kind of able to not only kind of get more focused on the maps that we thought worked not only for us, but might work to kind of generate the kind of feedback that will give us valuable insights as we take the next steps. But also kind of I think, recognize that we've done enough designing around some of these maps that there are some things that are not likely to work, and that we're able to therefore kind of eliminate those from consideration. So just want to thank again Commissioner Lumley, because I thought it was a really productive meeting that got us a bunch of clarity and closer to what I think Commissioner Siegel is suggesting, which is a very limited number of maps that will give us manageable feedback to move to the next iteration.
Thank you, Commissioner Fleischman. Commissioners Green or Lorente, do you have anything to add to your group's report out? So we'll take it to a broader discussion to hone in on the themes. I did want to pause. Commissioner Hanson, can you repeat for the group the numbers of the maps you were considering? And I know you did include a comment that you were considering actually map 11, which was an amended version of 7. So which of the current sample map numbers was your group honing in on?
6, 8, 9, and 11.
Great. And Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, you and Commissioner Baldini were really focusing on number 9, and that was.
Well, we were looking at what is now 9, 10, and 11. Those are the three maps that reflect what we were looking at as some choices, some broader choices that could be played with.
And is it fair to say, but you ended up coalescing most around sample map 9?
Well, we had worked on what is now sample 9, but we don't have we're not wedded to that. We just felt like 9, 10, and 11 reflect the variety of the things we've been talking about in terms of some of the larger scale choices that can be made.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lumley, your group was really focused in on numbers 7, 9, and 10.
Yeah, but we didn't have sample map 11 at the time.
Correct.
But sample map 11 and sample map 7 are very similar. I would say the biggest difference is the treatment of the Lloyd District area. And we haven't met since then, but and so I can't speak for the group, but it's a good variation of map setup, very similar.
So for those following along at home, essentially maps 6 through 11 were each work group had some level of overlap or some level of focus on those maps during and following their sessions. Okay, just wanted to keep score. Commissioner Manjarres, followed by Commissioner Fleischman.
I have a comment that's, I guess, generally for each group. Is this the time to go into a broader discussion?
Yep.
I think my comment is related to 7 and 11 specifically, and this sort of carries over from the conversation we had last time around pulling from the inner east side to get population from downtown and for the west side district. And I still haven't really heard a clear justification for that in thinking about where people live, work, and play. I think part of it is some data that I'm familiar with, and I'm just realizing would probably be very helpful, but I guess we can continue to talk about it, is looking at transportation patterns and how folks actually move around from these different neighborhoods. I had sat on a Metro government work group around transportation, and we spent a lot of time looking at corridors. And I haven't seen a lot of folks. So in thinking about where people are living, whether they're living downtown or whether they're living on the inner east side, we don't see a lot of flow of I live downtown and I make my way over to the east side, or vice versa, right? Folks tend to stick to their place. Where we do see a lot of flow, and this is where I think looking at maps 9 and 10, for example, or 9 specifically, there is a lot of movement, but across the Selwood Bridge and down south, especially between folks who are near Lewis and Clark in that area coming over to Selwood and vice versa, right? Folks are moving across there. And St. John's, obviously there's some movement across to go to Forest Park, but it's pretty limited as well. So I guess I'm curious to hear more about the justification around pulling from the inner east side downtown. I think I'm just missing it in the conversation. So I just wanted, it's more of a clarifying question, I guess.
Can I jump in on that? Is that all right? To answer that question. Thank you. So map 7 and 11 are based on sort of a renter's district for that area, the inner southeast area. And map 9 is a reflection of the south east part, or the southern border on the east side, because they might have a connection more be economically or socially. And map 10 was developed on a transit dependent initiative, somebody that doesn't drive and sees major roads as a more of a boundary, and looking at transit pathways. And so it was a look at the whole city, but the way they drew the inner east side was along major vehicle transportation routes. Does that help? Commissioner Medwards?
Yes, that's definitely helpful. And I think that makes a lot of sense in looking at where the major roads are. I guess for me, it would be important to see that extra layer of data in terms of how the movement across those transportation lines. And also, I mean, and this is just more anecdotal because I've lived in the inner southeast area. I just feel like there's a lot of differences between the renters in downtown and the renters on the east side. And so I think this goes back to the conversation about not treating renters as a monolith across the city, but also it might be worth discussion in the engagement period. So, you know what I mean? I think I'm just elevating it as something where I'm struggling with that one particularly more than other maps, but I appreciate the explanation. I would be curious to hear from other folks who are leaning in that direction as well.
Before I call on folks, so we are working to pull up maps as you're discussing them, getting a little bit more granular than we expected, and that's fine. Just want people to be able to visualize a little bit as you're starting to hone in. So we'll get that going, but I will start with Commissioners Fleischman, Lumley, Chisholm, and then followed by Judd. So Commissioners Fleischman.
I just haven't lowered my hand. I'm sorry. I'm gonna lower my hand.
Perfect. All right, then we'll start with you, Commissioner Fleischman.
Thanks. So just on the last topic about this kind of inner eastern district connection to what is a largely western district, I think I think it's interesting. When I've spoken to Commissioner Chisholm about this, for example, and looked at these maps, I think the consideration would be actually that kind of the inner east side, central east side, more of the industrial and commercial area has affinity potentially with kind of the center city. I do have the experience of having lived on both sides of the river and having lived in the east and worked in the west, and now live in the west and work sometimes in the east. So, but usually kind of close in. So I do think that there's transportation, there's business that's done in that kind of core. But if you go too far beyond, and this is my concern with some of the maps, you enter into residential areas or areas that feel different, and where folks don't think of themselves as kind of being in the center of the city. So I take your point about wanting to be really clear, and I think to Commissioner Judge's earlier point around, folks will tell us, right? So what we want to get is a set of maps that are few, but allow us to hear the kind of critical feedback that can help us. And in that regard, I just wanted to, and I think Autumn asked this question in saying kind of, what were the maps that that the three different groups landed on. I just to check for understanding, all three groups found map 9 interesting. 2 groups found map 10 interesting, and 2 groups found map 11 interesting in my count, and the other maps, only 1 group found of interest. There were 3 other maps, 6, 7, and 8. So for me, I'm hearing that we're kind of moving towards kind of a concentrated discussion on maps 9, 10, and 11. That's what I'm hearing right now, subject to our ongoing conversation.
Yes, as a point of clarification, I didn't frame it that way, but thank you for doing the analysis. 100% of the groups did focus in on 11. Actually, group 1 was viewing 11, which they thought was 7 at the time. All 3 were focusing on number 9, so number 9 and 11, and 2 of the groups had 10. So, and then 6, 7, and 8 had interest from 1 of the groups. That was a really helpful summary. So just a note before we go to Commissioners Chisholm and Judd, we're going to try to, if you're talking about a specific map, we'll try to have it up, or we'll just try to have a visual there so that folks can follow along as more of a visual aid. If you're going a little fast, we might like have to catch up. Little organic intelligence at work. So thanks for being patient, Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, so to address Commissioner Manjares's question about the renters, Alex, is it possible to get to map 11? Excellent, great. And again, 11 is a very close variation or cousin of 7. The difference between the 2 is that the Lloyd district is now in the north and northeast zone, and then some other additional changes just to population balance. Sumner is now with the rest of Park Rose in the eastern district, and some adjustment along Sandy Boulevard there. If I could, Alex, is it possible for me to share a screen here real quick? That would be excellent if I could do that. See if that works. Hey, all right. So this is a map from the EPA's environmental justice tool that shows the census blocks that are 75% or more renters. And as you can see, you zoom out here, it is heavily concentrated in the western downtown zone, northwest Old Town, downtown University, but then also the central east side here, and then running up into Buckman and Kearns neighborhoods here. There are, of course, renters along I-5, and there are heavy concentrations of renters along I-5 and along 205, and some smatterings here and there. But I think if we're thinking of renters, particularly the folks who live in and around downtown on both sides of the river as a community of interest, I think to me that is a block of residents we ought to really consider carefully. Again, taking into account Commissioner Kimura's caution several weeks ago to me that the folks who are renters on east of 205 are a different kind of people than the renters who are in the central east side. So wanting to make sure we're not trying to think of renters broadly as a group, but really sort of this focused geographic zone. That's really for me why Commissioner Saxon and I have sort of collaborated on what has become map 7 and then 11 with an effort to try and really think about that piece. In addition to that, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I think it's important that we have City Council oversight on the Central City 2035 planning, a comprehensive plan. It's been in place since 1988 and revised in 2015, in 2020, which this basically maps onto, with the exception of the Lloyd and Albina zones, which are now in map 11 in the north and northeast zone as part of the historic Albina area. So a lot of you have heard about this many times, so I will stop talking now.
Can I respond to that? Just like a follow-up question? Because I hear I know you had shared that map with me over email, so I appreciate looking at that. I guess that makes sense to me, and I appreciate Commissioner Kimura's comment about the cultural differences between the renters in those areas that is more tied to the dynamics of the community. I worry that lumping renters, all that huge group of renters in with the West Side District actually mitigates their voting strength. So I think that you would be more likely to get a renter representative if they were on the east side where they had more voting strength. So I feel like it actually washes out their voice a little bit to include it with such a large swath of affluent folks on the west side. And I think that's my fundamental concern is like, I think it's that group together. I'm not sure if there would be a lot of synergy there to increase their voting strength, but I do think that pulling them in with the west side would actually mitigate their voting strength. So I do want to like elevate that and maybe ask it as a question to try to understand your response to that concern, I guess.
Sounds like you and I have the same goal. We're just talking about the means to that end. I took a look at the populations and the west side portion of that, the downtown, just downtown, Old Town, Goose Hollow, University, and Pearl and Northwest is about 46,000 people. And then the Buckman, Kearns, and Central East Side zone is about 18,000 people. And of those folks, when you include Northwest, it's about, I'm estimating here, about 2/3 renters. So you take the, what is essentially 63,000 people and recognize about 2/3 of them are renters. And then reminding ourselves that we had testimony this morning from the public, I think it was Marianne, who want us to remember that there are low-income folks throughout West Side. I think what you've got there is the ability in a multi-member ranked choice voting environment for the West Side to have some pretty healthy political power from folks who are renters. I think you'd also get renters from those precincts, those census blocks in the Central East Side, which tend to be closer to 50-55% renters, but across the entire district, I think you'd have some political power there as well, some representation there as well. So I think it sounds like, again, we're onto the same goal, but just trying to understand the math and thinking about it and pondering the possibilities.
And one of the biggest questions that arose across the work groups, just as a reminder, was where does a West District have to cross the river? And so just to summarize, there were maps that had it crossing closer to Sellwood, further up north, encompassing, I think the maps that they just further up north. So sometimes including the central parts of the Central District, sometimes crossing 84. And then there was a map also that crossed into St. John's. So, but this question of where does the West cross? Just wanted to flag that as the broader point of discussion. So Commissioners Judd and Commissioner Lumley. See you both have your hands up. Commissioner Judd, do you still have a?
Yep. So I had the fortunate pleasure in the work group on Monday to have a member of the Sellwood Homeowner Association, as well as a member from the Buckman community. The member from the Buckman community was off camera. She was off camera because she had her molars pulled but she didn't want to miss this conversation. And so she wanted to be a part of this. Her comments were, she felt as if her community as a renters community had a different set of values than the West Side. She felt as if, I don't want to, this might not be a direct quote, but I'll use as many words that she used. She said she didn't want the power of that community to be consumed by the affluent powers of the West Side. And offering up, and she said, you know, if the districts wouldn't be, knowing that they would have to cross somewhere, she was offering up some wood in the trade to keep her community as part of the East Side. When that happened, the gentleman from Selwood appreciated her comment, but said that he felt as if his community's values were more aligned with the East Side than with the West Side. All that to say, as Commissioner Maher has expressed already, this is going to be a very interesting debate once we take it to the community, because at least from the working group that I was in, there are some very strong opinions about who should be a part of the West Side, who should not be part of the West Side. There's some very strong opinions about the differences in the common interests in those communities that are separated by the river.
Thank you for, in the moment, in that listening session, really helping to bridge those discussions and then reporting back, Commissioner Judd. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I was thinking about the question from Commissioner Benoit about the renters group of people are so different, and they're not the same and probably shouldn't be considered as a monolith, and I couldn't agree more. And I was wondering how much effort it would be if we could get data from the city about where we have affordable housing development, and also any developments in the pipeline that might help us as we look at this idea of a renters district being moved into the West Side. I do want to point out, though, also that the West Side is a very large district, and I wouldn't call it a renters district. It was just using the rationale for pulling some of the East Side into the West Side. In our group, we talked about making sure that the maps that we are going to present to the public would have very clearly defined rationale. And I think that we're heading in the right direction with maps 9, 10, and 11 of being able to offer that kind of rationale. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins.
Yeah, I had a couple questions or a couple comments. I agree with what Commissioner Lumley just said, that this question of where a West Side district will cross the river, it has to go out to the people in the public hearings, because I think a lot of people, unless you've been playing with the mapping as we all have been doing, I don't think it's intuitive that everybody understands that there's 15 to 20,000 people short if you do just the West Side alone. You have to cross the river. So the question then becomes where. And there are undoubtedly going to be people who aren't happy about whatever the choice is, if that ends up being the map kind of configuration that we choose. The other thing I would just encourage folks, there is a Zoom seminar or a Zoom informational briefing on Friday. And I think a lot of the commissioners have had exposure to that. It's at noon, where the folks from Common Cause California are going to be talking about the concept of asset packing, which relates to the impact on districting and redistricting of taking a lot of the city's primary financial and revenue generating assets and putting them in a single zone. And what does that do to representation across the board? So if you take the Central District 2035, that includes much of the performing arts centers, stadiums, all kinds of big public, the convention center, all kinds of big public facilities, and puts them all in the same zone. And what are the potential adverse effects on representation if you do that? And I think it'll be a good conversation for folks to take a listen to on Friday. Maybe it'll affect some people's thinking about that approach.
Thank you, Commissioner. And the team did just drop a link to the info session you were referencing, and that is at noon this Friday. And it's available on Zoom, and there will also be a recording that will be made available too. Commissioner Manjarres, followed by Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you. I appreciate what Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins just mentioned about, I agree wholeheartedly. I think we're going to need to hear from these different communities, because it does sound like we do have some alignment in terms of having an East Side district, and there is some sort of tweaking that's going to happen. And I was reflecting on the comments from ERCO saying, keep ERCO together. We have these different community hubs on the East Side, so there's going to be conversation there. But I do think the most controversial aspects of this is going to be where it crosses. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. And I do think that in fairness to the different communities, having an option that crosses, so looking at map 11, for example, that crosses on Central East Side, having a map like 9 that pulls from Selwood area in the south, and then having a map that pulls from St. John, I think St. John's is also I think appropriate in bringing those different options, because I think we're assuming, and there's been many reasons on why folks say St. John's wants to keep, doesn't want to come over to the west side. I think there's a lot of argument for why folks in the central part won't want to come to the east side and on the south, right? So I do think in terms of having just a diversity of perspective, that would be my preference. But I just wanted to name that if that is something that we're looking for. And I know that Commissioner Lumley had mentioned we shouldn't put things out there for the sake of, folks just coming out to push back on something. But I think that would actually encourage, I haven't heard from many folks from the St. John's neighborhood. I have, friends and close folks out there who I haven't had these conversations with. And so I do think in terms of encouraging robust discussion, those 3 options seems to me like they would provide the most diversity of options for folks. So I think that's something to consider.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hanson, followed by Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, thank you. So this is building a little bit on addressing some of the things that Commissioner Manjarres was saying, and then also commenting on Commissioner Laurentiis in the chat. So I was also at the community listening session on Monday and had 2 folks in my small breakout from North Portland. One was from Kenton and one was but in North Portland, and had done a lot of work there. And one of the things that they both really stressed was how thinking about the band of North Portland as a community of common interest along the river, thinking about interacting with the Port of Portland. All we've heard conversations about Columbia up there. And what I'm noticing looking at, I've got the file open that Sophia dropped in the chat that has maps 6 through 11, just like all visually in one place. And one of the things I'm just noticing is we do have, like, none of them have just a whole band of North Portland, which would require probably using 84 as a northern boundary of East Portland, which I think we've moved away from at this point, but just wanted to flag that in case it is an option that we want to offer, of like at least one map that has all of East Portland together, or North Portland, pardon me. So that was one thought. Another thought that I had was this, I think, is to building on Commissioner Laurentiis' point, looking at maps 9, 10, and 11, thinking about making different considerations at the edges. So one of the things that I mentioned that we talked about in the first work group is having consistency where there are similarities, and so the differences are starker. So like one example, if we, for example, decide to go with 9, 10, and 11, either as 3 or as 3 of more, wanting to see if we can maybe go back to flow and like, or with the feedback about the J district, and have some consistency at the boundary between the East Portland district and then sort of the middle southern district, just so the lines are consistent, so the maps among themselves have a little bit more just like clean lines, so that differences are more apparent.
I agree with what Commissioner Hanson just said. And Josh, thank you for your comment to everyone in the chat. I think the idea of coming up with a mashup that pretty well solidifies the areas of commonality and then flag a couple of key choices or alternatives. I lived in the Southwest for 11 years. I've been in the Buckman and neighborhood for the past 7 years. I've been a renter, I've been a homeowner, and so there's a small portion of the city I feel pretty comfortable with. And I think I don't think we're too far from we're not too far away from coming up with a mashup with some key alternatives. And I think the Western Crossing, if you will, in the area of the Central East Side Industrial District would be one to flag. I don't agree with Moreland and Selwood being part of a Western district, but I think it's worth getting comment of. With regard to St. John's as part of a Western district, I'm not so hot on that. So those are my opinions. Let's do a mashup. Let's find those areas of commonality. Let's find those areas of difference and get some feedback on them. And that's all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Commissioners Lumley and Vinciple Robbins, I think we'll have the two of you, if there are no other pressing comments after the two of yours, we'll have the two of you round us out for this portion. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll move on to review hear some analysis from the flow team of the sample maps, so folks can see those side by side as well. So Commissioner Lumley, we'll start with you and go to Commissioner Vinciple Robbins.
Thank you. In response to Commissioner Mamor's a question about hearing from folks in the St. John's or North Portland area, in the streamlining session, the listening session on Monday, in my group, there was a gentleman who used the chat room quite a bit, and he is involved with the neighborhood association in North Portland. And he was very adamant about not splitting up the St. John's and the whole north or peninsula area that he referred to. The neighborhoods, he said, are intricately intertwined. They struggle with issues with large commercial and industrial use, and they have the same kind of livability issues that other parts of the city have, and they don't feel aligned at all with the west side or the south and southwest. And made the same comment several times in the chat room as well as verbally. So he felt very adamant about that, and also was very opposed to separating out the African-American community in North Portland. And then early in the process, I did meet with a small group of folks in the St. John's area who felt very much the same, that they didn't feel connected to the west side in that area at least. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I could also say that there's I don't see myself ever voting for a map that includes the St. John's area being moved into a West District. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Vinciple Robbins.
I think this is sample map 9 that's up. I just wanted to make a couple comments about the decision-making on, that Commissioner Baldini and I did as we were working on this map. We did, to Commissioner Hanson's point, this does have the North District all together. The Port of Portland property, I'm sure everybody knows that the Port of Portland owns a lot of property out in the north tip, and along the Willamette River, as well as the airport. So this basically gives a lot of actually gives a lot of port property into 3 zones, because there's also terminals on the west side. So there would be potentially nine city councilors who would be making sure that the port is a good neighbor to the constituents. We also wanted to keep 3 high schools that have been historically underinvested in, as together as we could. So in the North District, Roosevelt and Jefferson remain intact in a single zone. They're not split up. And to the degree that we could, McDaniel, which used to be Madison, which stretches from north of 84 all the way down through Montevilla, that also is kept intact in this map. And the one thing that we could still play with is where the inner southeast district cuts across from 205 over to 82nd. Right now, it's cuts across at Powell, but maybe we want to make it go south to Holgate. So that was something that, as we've been having these conversations and hearing perspective about the Jade District, there's wiggle room there. And it does preserve all 4 of the outer east school districts in that outer east zone. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And that was map 9. We were reflecting. Okay. We're 7:48. We'll come back at 7:54, be like 5.5 minutes. And we'll reconvene. Then we'll throw it over to the flow team. They'll have a presentation to walk through, and we'll also be able to continue this conversation around mapping, but with more specifics and really start to hone in. So we'll see you in about 5 minutes. 54. We're reconvening. Commissioner Van Robbins, is that hand left over from the last section? Just checking. Now, yeah, thanks. As folks are joining, I will just kind of introduce this section, throw it over to the Flow Analytics team, but as an introduction, we'll just remind folks, our goal, so by May 31st, we want to be able to vote on the draft maps to take into the public hearings in July. So as a reminder, there's a month between when you actually vote and when the hearings will be held throughout the districts to provide ample time for members of the public to talk about them within their communities, within groups, to be able to provide initial feedback and to be able to have enough information to work with in those public hearings. And the public hearings themselves will also convene discussions that will likely build on one another. And so you'll essentially be having many discussions and kind of live discussions with members of the community, but also amid broader discussion as well. So just keep in mind, we'll need to really identify how many maps we want to take to the public. We've started that conversation in prior meetings, and today we've hit on discussions around 1 or 2, potentially up to 4, I heard. So just keep that in mind. How many maps are you asking community members to consider? And then what do you want those maps to do? Right? What kind of discussions, what kind of answers, what kind of clarity do you want them to generate to be able to help this body get to a final decision? And finally, the maps that you take into July do not necessarily have to be the final maps that you end up with, right? You'll still have the month of August to workshop and develop those final maps and to take in and integrate any feedback that you hear, thoughts that may have changed, and any ideas that may have coalesced over that time. So with that, I see actually a hand, Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I thought we just had a really interesting and good discussion, and I don't want to lose the momentum here, and would like to test a few motions about the kind of map attributes that we no longer like to consider. And so I've got 4 of them. First one is I'd like to move that the Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps that separate the West District, which is west of the Willamette River.
I'll second that.
Okay, so the first motion, repeat it, is to no longer focus on maps that separate a district west of the Willamette.
I put it in the chat room.
Perfect. The motion, the Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps that separate a west district, which is west of the Willamette. So you won't split a western district. And I had a second, Commissioner Chisholm, and then followed by Commissioner Hanson.
Just for clarity, you're saying that what we would be agreeing to here is that we would stop considering any map that doesn't include everything west of the Willamette in one district. What happens east of the Willamette in that district is still up for debate, but everything west of the river, one district, anybody who does one of these crazy things is out, right?
Right, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, can we also clarify that this is just for the maps we're deciding on this month and not like forever?
That's fine.
Cool, great, thanks.
When we get a great community outcry that there must be a boundary at Highway 26, we will reconsider.
You know, we got to be open to being surprised.
For the current consideration, the motion is that for the current consideration this month, in terms of which draft maps to take to the public for July hearings, the IDC will no longer focus on maps that separate a west district, which is west of the Willamette. Okay. And is there any opposition to that motion? Okay, seeing none. That's approved. Commissioner Lumley, I heard you had a few more.
I do have money in chat room.
Okay.
The Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps this month that separate an east district. In other words, north to south separation.
I'm prepared to second that as well.
And that was you, Commissioner Sexton. Perfect. All right. And I'll reread that one. For the current consideration, the IDC will no longer focus on maps this month that separate an East District. And Commissioner Fleischman, I think yours is a new hand.
Yes, just if you could clarify, Commissioner Lumley, we have a set of maps. Which maps does that eliminate?
Most likely one that has a central district. It's not one
Okay.
we've talked about that much.
So,
and,
so it doesn't impact maps 9, 10, or 11.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
A number of the earlier maps do separate in East District. So, and Commissioner Chisholm?
I'm wondering if we can be more precise. It seems that all of the maps 6 through 11, everything east of 205 is in an Eastern District. Again, there's some discussion about what belongs west of 205 to go to 82nd, Montevilla, and so forth. But east of 205 would be the line. Is that, am I reading you right, Commissioner Lumley?
Yes, and I'm more concerned about the maps that like at Highway 26 or Powell Boulevard. I realize we have to go over to, west of 205 on many of these maps, and I think those are fine.
I guess my friendly amendment would be the IDC would no longer consider maps this month that separate areas east of 205 into more than one district.
That sounds great. I like that.
Friendly amendment. So the Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps this month that separate an Eastern District east of the 205. I'm so bad sometimes with the cardinal directions. It's rough. Commissioner Lumley, I heard that was a friendly amendment. Is there any opposition to the version as amended? Okay, that too passes. So for those keeping score, essentially have two motions so far that have focused the discussion going forward on keeping a district on the west whole and east of the 205, keeping that a district east there whole, but allowing for some expansion further west. Okay, and I think you dropped. Great.
So the next one is the Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps this month that have a central district.
So I will ask a clarifying question. To be clear, a central district, you mean a district that is surrounded by other districts, not, just for clarity, not districts that include primarily the central district or a central district dominated by a central district.
Yeah, none of the maps we're considering have that, but it would be something like sample map number 8. So maybe we don't need this motion because we're not considering it.
I think for clarity.
Yeah, I think for clarity on this one, if you could speak to which maps you would like to see removed, that would be helpful.
Sample map 8.
Maybe another way to put this would be all 4 districts have to touch the border of the city, the outer border of the city. We won't have a district that floats in the middle somewhere.
Or how about they all have to have 3 districts to the south, like 3 districts along the southern border? Would that help?
That goes a little further than his motion.
Oh.
The reason I didn't say that is because there was a map that was presented prior to this that was not a central district, but only had 2 districts that bordered the southern part of the city.
Okay.
Yeah, if you had like map 8 plus the airport, you'd have that.
I'm not
To
sure I'm ready to
basically-
disqualify map 8.
Yeah, so the maps that currently, I think meet this are 3, 5, 8, 2, 3, 5, and 8. And 8 was on the table for one of the groups as well. So Commissioner Lumley, would you want?
I would say more like map number 5, which I would really like to see. But yeah, I'm just getting a flavor of the group. If it doesn't pass the vote, that's a split off my back.
I think map 5 is already disqualified.
I think you're right.
So
Well, this doesn't
Commissioner,
have a second, so we could move on.
yeah, I was going to ask if you wanted to keep the motion on the table. So we'll move to the next one. And sorry, Commissioner Siegel, did
I
you
was
still want to
gonna
comment?
I was going to second Commissioner Lumley's motion.
Is it still on the table, Commissioner?
Sure.
Okay. Commissioner, the current motion. Sorry, I'm finding your exact language. So the independent district will no longer focus on maps this month that have a central district. And we do have a second. And is there any opposition to the motion as it stands?
I'm a no.
Okay, so we will go to a roll call vote.
There was a hand up.
And
Commissioner Hanson.
sorry, Commissioner Hanson, you did have your hand up. And
have
Commissioner Fleischman, actually.
I have a suggested amendment to the motion, which might mitigate Commissioner Manjarres's concern, which is just specifically amending the motion to say specifically no longer considering maps 2, 3, or 5.
Commissioner Lumley, would that amendment getting specific about the maps on the table, would that be friendly? 2, 3, and 5.
Which are the other 3 with central districts that are not map number 8. And Commissioner Manjarres, I don't know if that would assuage your concern.
I think those were already taken out by the first 2 motions because they split the east side district or the other district. So it really just is map 8. And I can clarify that my concern on this one is, again, I think not that it's something I'm necessarily leaning towards, but when you're looking at population numbers and cultural communities and communities of interest, I don't think this one is as far afield as some of the other maps. And so I don't want to take it off the table at this point before we've matched it to the criteria. I feel like I haven't had time to sort of study this one particularly. So that's why I don't think I'm prepared through this process to just, it doesn't seem an obvious choice to throw out to me.
Commissioner Lumley, did you have any response to those remarks and to an amendment that would specify excluding maps 2, 3, and 5, sample maps 2, 3, and 5?
No, I think
I have a quick
it
clarifying
doesn't pass.
question.
It doesn't pass. So
One second, Commissioner Chisholm. Actually, I couldn't hear you, Commissioner Lumley. Could you repeat that?
no, let's hear from Commissioner Chisholm first, please.
Okay.
Yeah, my
Commissioner
clarifying
Chisholm?
question is what's our purpose of these statements, these principles? Is it to eliminate some of the maps we've been working on here, or is it to advise the public who are creating maps on their own and submitting them to us for feedback that we're no longer considering certain kinds of maps, so please don't bother sending them to us? Or please, or perhaps stated positively, please iterate on the concepts that we have asked for.
I don't think that was my intent of the message. I'm not trying to send a message to the public. I'm trying to focus the commission's work in a direction that will deliver maps that are useful and could actually withstand a supermajority vote at some point. We have been looking at maps that have a central district theme for quite a while, and they all present very significant trade-offs. And this one, number 8 in particular, it puts the downtown district into a north section, which is something I think is very troublesome. It also separates, communities of color, especially the African-American community. So we just haven't seen an iteration of a map that has a central theme that feels like it could pass. And I don't think it's a good use of our time as a commission to continue considering maps like that. But it may be moot if we're only gonna be focusing on maps that look like sample maps 9, 10, and 11, which do have 3 districts that border on the south.
Commissioner Manjarres, followed by Commissioner Vensicle Robbins.
Yeah, I want to test that assumption because I'm not sure that, and again, I think the process here of let's do motions and get rid of things that are obvious choices feels to me like it makes sense and we found some consensus, but moving forward on this process without consensus or at least some sort of way to at least test this against real criteria is important because I don't think that map number 8 actually does break up the African-American community as we've talked about it. And I would like to see more analysis of map 8. And again, I'm not saying that I would necessarily support map 8, but I have not heard, I don't think from what I just heard, I don't think it matches that analysis. So I feel like we're moving very quickly and it's not giving me as a commissioner enough time to do analysis on that. And that's probably the most different of one of the most distinct maps that we've seen. So I'm comfortable with, we're looking at preserving an East Side district. We're looking at holding the West Side district together, understanding that we need more population, right, to even make that work. But in terms of the middle part and figuring out where we're gonna pull downtown population, I don't think that's settled. And I don't think that map actually does break the African-American community.
You could be right on that aspect. There are significant problems with taking the downtown area and putting it up in the north, and we did just pass a motion that.
But I need
said
to
we're gonna
understand those
keep-
problems, I think is my point.
That's fine, but we also did just pass a motion that we were going to keep the west side whole, that is west of the Willamette River, and this particular map does pull the downtown corridor across the river. But I hear your point, and if people still want to continue to consider maps that have a central district, then the challenge would be to either produce one or just not consider them anymore. So it could be a moot point. Maybe we don't need a motion on this.
Yes, so let's go to Commissioner Vensicle Robbins and Commissioner Fleischman. Before we do that, Commissioner Lumley, I think you're considering whether to take the motion off the table. But I think there's still kind of probably points to talk about in the central district. Okay, perfect. Let's go to Commissioner Vensicle Robbins and Commissioner Fleischman.
I just was going to concur with what Commissioner Lumley just said. We voted to keep the west side intact and not split it. So Commissioner map 8 seems to violate that thing that we just voted on. And the other thing that I note about number 8 is all of the conversation we had earlier this evening about the east side, inner east side. Map 8 stretches way out into the inner east side, and it doesn't seem to conform with the comments that I heard earlier this evening about that.
Thank you, Commissioner Vensicle Robbins. And just as a point of clarification, map 8 does cross into the west, so it would split that western district. It's a very point. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yes, I speak as one of the folks that has tried to design a district that has this kind of central component to it that, as Commissioner Chisholm defined it, doesn't touch one of the borders. Outside borders of the city. I feel like it's in the end going to be a failed exercise because a little bit of kind of what we're hearing right now is each one of us can raise a significant concern or objection, which makes it difficult to kind of get us to the point where we feel comfortable with it. And it feels like the other approaches that we now proposed that are exemplified in maps 9, 10, and 11 are much more likely to get us to a place where we all feel like it's a satisfactory solution to this map drawing challenge that we have. So when I urge Commissioner Lumley to keep the proposal on the table and let's and move to a vote.
As a reminder, so the procedure would be if there is a vote in opposition, then that does lead to a roll call vote. And so a roll call vote for this, because it's just a procedural motion, would require just a simple majority of those present. And we do have one absence, so that would make it 7 to carry.
Yeah, in hindsight, I probably didn't need to introduce this motion because we already just previously locked in the west side and the east side, and so drawing a map to central is not needed. And probably, and I'm sure not possible at this point. So I think by definition, it is a moot question, and I should not have introduced it. That's how I feel. And I realize people want me to, I just heard a voice to keep the motion on the table, but we can vote on however we want, but the prior two motions will not allow us to have a central district.
And Commissioner Manjarrez, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I think you're correct. I think it was a moot point. Can I just make a point of process? Because I'm definitely speaking up for slowing down a little bit, just because I feel like I'm not able to track the different maps as you're throwing motions on the table, to the point where we didn't even realize that one was already off the table. So I think if there's two ways to go about this. One is we have two motions. If we can go through a process, and maybe it's like taking a 5-minute break where we can get to a point of understanding which maps are then on the table now that we're considering, and or alternatively, to Commissioner Fleischman's point, if folks want to make a motion to proceed with specific maps, then we can have that conversation as well. But I do think this sort of knockout process, moving this fast, is making me feel uncomfortable, especially given what just happened, because it feels like we're not doing it in alignment with the criteria and process that we had talked about at the beginning. It just feels like we're moving really fast, haphazardly, and it's making me feel very concerned.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So we
And I will
can
say-
keep on the motion. I just think it is moot, so I'm not sure we need to go through the process.
I will say that we also have the Flow Analytics team. We've been talking back and forth as you see where you're going to focus. And so we don't have the maps visually up in front of us. That's one other kind of factor here. We're talking about different dynamics, but we can't, it's hard to follow along.
There is one
So I
hand
know-
up, an additional hand up, and I have another
And-
motion.
Yeah, so what I would say is like the purpose of the presentation is to be able to review the sample maps as well, but have the Flow Analytics team do it from a more technical perspective. But Commissioner Lumley, I know that you also had a fourth amendment or a fourth motion that you were considering. So Commissioner Fleischman, let's hear from you. Commissioner Lumley, let's think about what you want to do for your motions at this point. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, it's actually not, I'm glad to drop this, but I want to say it's not a moot point because sample map number 5 has a central district that does not include the west.
Yes, can I respond? to that? It does. It also divides the east side.
But Commissioner Lumley, these are two separate design principles, right? Because, but anyway, it's your motion, so you know.
I'm going to withdraw this
call.
motion.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to withdraw this motion because it is moving. We don't need to go through the process of counting votes. But if we have 45 minutes left, and then our next meeting, we have to really hone in on the maps that are going to work for us. So I don't know if it feels rushed, but we do have a really tight timeline. So I like to put in the chat room the next one. The Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps this month that include the St. John's into the A West District, west of the Willamette River.
So that did not hit my chat, but I think I got it in principle.
There we go. I had to hit return.
It's there.
So there is a motion on the floor. The IDC will no longer focus on maps this month that include the St. John's so that includes, sorry, St. John's in a West District, west of the Willamette River. Commissioner Lemon, did you put a hand back up or
Oh, no, I'll take it down now.
Commissioner Manhattan?
Can I make a substitute motion to keep the St. John's as an option for the public to consider?
That's
Well,
in
there are two.
opposition to this motion. I don't know how that would. be
It
a
is there.
substitute.
It's that there would be two motions on the table. So, and they are in direct conflict with one another.
So the motion I made
So I believe
does not have a second yet.
it doesn't.
So if
Okay.
it doesn't get us, okay.
I'll second.
Commissioner Green, which motion are you seconding?
Commissioner Lumley's.
Okay, so Commissioner Manhattan, I will not infer your opposition to the motion on the table. So I'm going to ask if there's any opposition to the Commissioner Lumley's motion.
I oppose.
And I'll read it again, that the IDC will no longer focus on maps this month that include St. John's in a West District, west of the Willamette River. However, I will ask for a second for Commissioner Manhattan's. Is there a second for Commissioner Manhattan's motion to keep St. John's? Okay. And so Commissioner Manhattan's, your motion is to have the IDC continue to consider maps that may include St. John's in a Western District. Okay. For transparency, here's what I'm deciding. Which motion to take in which order. Commissioner Lumley, your motion came first. You do have an opposition. We need to go to roll call. Commissioner Manhattan, and Commissioner Manhattan, your motion came second. Is there any opposition to Commissioner Manhattan's proposal to consider maps that do include St. John's with the Western District?
Yes.
I oppose.
Okay, great.
I oppose.
So what we'll do is we'll go in order and we will move to a roll call vote for the motion that came first. And then we will go to a roll call vote dependent on what we see to Commissioner Manhattan's motion. So first we'll take the motion from Commissioner Lumley. And we will also, and Dawson, let me just check with Sophia. Are you ready to note, because we're moving to a roll call vote? Great. I will call your names. And the motion, as a reminder, we are voting on current one, the independent commission, the IDC will no longer focus on maps this month that include St. John's in a Western District west of the Willamette River. So I will start with Commissioner Manhattan.
No.
I'm sorry, another interruption. You can vote yes in the affirmative, in opposition, or abstain. Commissioner Kimura. Okay. Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I'm a little concerned that we not get to the flow analytics piece. So could we hear Commissioner Lumley's motion one more time? And then I think we need to vote on it if we have a second.
Yeah, so the Commissioner Lumley's motion is that the Independent District Commission will no longer focus on maps this month that include St. John's into West District, west of the Willamette River.
Commissioner Kimura, we're doing a roll call vote, and so we're up to you for your vote.
I agree with the motion.
Commissioner Siegel,
Yes.
Commissioner Judd.
No.
Commissioner Lorente,
I vote in favor of Commissioner Lumley's motion.
Commissioner Chisholm,
Yes.
Commissioner Wise. Sorry, Commissioner, Commissioner, your camera's off and your sound is off. I can come back around. Okay, we'll come back to Commissioner Wise. Commissioner Baldini is absent. Commissioner Saxena.
Yes.
Commissioner Lumley.
Yes.
Commissioner Green.
Yes.
Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins.
Yes.
And sorry, Commissioner Fleischman.
Yes.
Okay,
And it
Commissioner
looks like
Weiss.
He's in the chat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Commissioner Saxena. And for the record, Commissioner Wise has voted yes on the motion. So the motion passes 10-2. So Commissioner Manjarres, would you like to withdraw your motion?
Yes, I'll withdraw my motion.
I have no further
so-
motions as well. Thank you very much.
Of course. So just to recap, before we move into Flo's presentation, we had 3 motions pass, and they were to focus the discussion going forward in consideration of maps on ones that keep a Western District whole, west of the Willamette, the Eastern District whole, east of the 205 and east, and to not consider maps that include St. John's in a Western District. Okay, thank you, everyone. So Flow Analytics team, can we have you present? And we are going to have the team focus on the maps, the sample maps that do meet the criteria.
Sure. So just to sort of manage some expectations here, we don't have a PowerPoint. What we do have is Alex ready to walk through maps 9, 10, and 11 and discuss any other maps or changes that you would like to see.
Yeah, thanks, Kimmy. So I'm sharing my screen now on sample map 9. We can look at particular areas or some of the statistics from the PDF reports that we produce for these maps that go just a little bit above and beyond the population equality criterion. We could also look at how these maps differ from one another, and I can zoom in and show some of those things, and because there are some similarities between 9, 10, and 11. I could start maybe with that, but I do want to also mention that at some point I could show the Jade District based on its business district boundary, which is more official compared to some street boundaries that Prosper Portland mentions and what Commissioner Chisholm and others have discussed with community members that expands that a little bit, just to get a sense of what we're all talking about when we say Jade District or what it could mean to different people. But yeah, sample map 9, this
Alex,
is, yeah.
Before you jump in, we do have a hand from
Oh,
Commissioner
sure.
Hanson.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say I realized that the ones that Flow Analytics are going to walk through, 9, 10, and 11, seem like they are the 3, given the motions that just happened, that are now like at the top. And so one of the things that maybe we can all think about as we're looking at these 3 is if, for example, like these could be the 3 that we present to the public and vote on at the end of the month, or what would need to change about these 3 for these 3 to be the ones that we offer. So just to add that realization and framing as we dive in. Thank you, Alex.
Very good point. Thank you. So yeah, sample map 9. This is meeting the motions that just passed. It has that west side district that crosses the Willamette on the east side. Has Selwood, East Moreland, Free College. It has an east side district that uses Highway 205 as a boundary, as well as 82nd Ave. It does not, the third motion, just mentioned that, it does not obviously have St. John's in a West Side district. I could turn on other layers if you guys would like me to as we go through them, but I'll stay at a high level now. Just say that East Side district also, includes all of Park Row School District, which is why it's extending over to the airport. That also kind of speaks to having part of Port Portland property. The difference that we'll see with sample maps 10 and 11 then get into some of the boundary between this green and teal district. So we'll see as we move forward, but I believe most of them use 84 as a boundary, especially as you get from the Willamette roughly to the Hollywood district. But there's where things differ. Some will be using Sandy Avenue a bit more, whereas this one, if I turn on the neighborhood boundaries, are going to follow them here. So we have Rose City Park would be in the teal district, whereas all of Roseway would be as well in that teal district. So the dividing line would then be between the boundary would be with the Cully neighborhood. There's any questions on this one before I move on? Not seeing any hands.
There
Oh.
is a, oh, sorry. There was a question in the chat. When you have a moment, could you please pull up the census map for the AAPI population?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then Commissioner Manjarrez and Commissioner Fleischman also have comments or questions. Commissioner
Great.
Manjarrez.
Yeah, I think would be one or between these two where I would like to see where ERCO and some of the other community-based organizations are located. And maybe that's not for this conversation, for the next conversation, just so that we can honor part of what we were hearing from those culturally specific organizations.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yes, I want to build on what Commissioner Hanson suggested kind of we be thinking about when we look at these maps to add reaction, our notion about what the expected reaction might be when we take this out into the public. Like what are some critical questions that might arise, or some strong pieces that people would really like about the map? Not what we necessarily think about the maps, but what we think the public might think. So to give an example, and again, I think that this map offers a lot of good things. Folks in Montvilla might feel like they're in the wrong district because they're in what they might see as kind of the inner East Side district. If I remember this correctly, Alex, if you show the kind of just the neighborhoods. And again, that it's not, yes, it's kind of associating Montvilla with all the neighborhoods that, that move west as opposed to the neighborhoods in the east. I'm not expressing that concern. I'm wondering, but it is when I look at this map, kind of, if I went out to the public, I would wonder what they might say about that as an example.
Thank you, Commissioner Fleischman. And in the chat, there was a clarification actually from Commissioner Chisholm, so maybe you're going to say this, to actually see the Asian American Pacific Islander mapped, the population mapped alone and with the districts overlaid. And
Exactly.
I also, okay, perfect. And then
with the district.
I think I have the location for the Urkel Community Center, right? And I believe it's just off, it would be in this map, not Sandy and 82nd, but more further along than Sandy. So it should be in the teal.
Urkel's,
like-
yeah, Urkel, their main headquarters is on Gleason at about 110 maybe. And then,
Oh.
Mhm.
and
So I'm
the,
thinking,
Africa House is at 102nd and probably not too far from Gleason. And then the Pacific Islander Family Center is on Sandy and 81st on the south side of Sandy.
Right.
Alex, if you could.
yeah,
zoom-
I was thinking of the network of organizations to clarify my
Oh,
question.
that's actually a good map to have. I support that.
A network of organizations map. Okay.
Alex, would you zoom in a bit to where the teal and the peach intersect there? Yeah, exactly there. And zoom out a little bit further so you can see this. So we've had a lot of conversation with folks from the AAPI community, folks from the Jade District who have asked us to consider that lens, the 82nd Street boundary to the south there, which this one has, but then explicitly this map has the Jade District in the teal side. So it's essentially separating the Jade District business community from the Asian American and Pacific Islander community that is to the points east and south. So for me, that's a critical element here is to find a way to put, it's not a lot of turf, right? It's moving that boundary up a few blocks to that horizontal jog, move it up a few blocks so we capture the rest of it. It does mean, to Commissioner Fleischman's point, is that we'd be separating Montevilla in part, but as I mentioned earlier, you can't have both. So, thank you, Alex.
On that note, if I may, I'll switch over to be using just a similar map, but just wanting to focus on what the Jade District may be. So technically, this is a business district that's outlined in orange. But then using census block boundaries that expand a little bit upon what Prosper Portland generally outlines as the boundary of Highway 205, Division, Powell, and 82nd. And see how this pink boundary extends a little beyond those streets to capture, there's businesses, there's homes on both sides that would feel part of that. So similarly, we can look at that district with the Asian and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations on here. So that gives you kind of a sense where those populations
How
are.
do you find that overlay that you're doing right there? That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, so let me go to that. So if you're on the commission's website, you can go to draw or submit a district map. It's going to be option 1. Will take you to the web map.
That'll show the Jade District and Jade District area.
Yes, it is showing, it's going to show, I had to pull this out to kind of just focus on those two, but let me show you what it will look like from this perspective that everyone has access to. So these business districts are part of supplemental data from the city of Portland. So if we turn those on, we'll see that there are many, obviously, across the city of Portland. So in the other map, I was filtering and showing just the Jade District, but you can see that here as well for the label. You can click on it to get the information, go to the website. And then
Can you send us, I don't mean to belabor this, but can you just send us an email with the instructions on how to do this? This is really useful.
Sure. Yes, we can.
Thank you.
I think the big takeaway though was that there are very many features when you're using this map. And if you use the supplemental dropdown plus the Census Bureau data and the districts, you can find those by using the little eye icon. You can turn different layers off if others want to expand their analysis.
I see one more hand from Secretary Robbins, and then I potentially move on to Secretary 10.
I just wanted to say that my desire, I guess, would be that for whatever maps we are going to take out for public comment and public hearings, that we would have a very concise descriptor of what priorities or choices were made in each map's design where you had to do trade-offs. So for instance, the question of Montavilla and Lentz, you cannot physically get an East Side district that includes both Montavilla and Lentz and doesn't blow through the population numbers. So some of those things the public won't have any familiarity with. So I think our descriptors on the different maps have to be very clear about what trade-offs were made in the choosing where certain boundaries were drawn.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we can certainly have the staff, once we have the final draft maps and we've been able to synthesize the discussions and all of the decision points that you made, we can provide that in the package that goes to the public. And I thought I saw, okay, perfect. And I think that's the last hand, Alex, if you want to move to the next map.
Sure. So sample map 10, description down here, but I'll kind of go through it interactively. So this is similar in that it has the West Side District. See that it doesn't actually extend as far on the east side here. So it's kind of a combination of including some of Central East Side as well as Southeast neighborhoods like Sellwood. So this is using some prominent roads, or in this case, the railway lines to draw that boundary. We can dive into that a little bit deeper if we'd like to look at that boundary. On the East Side District, it keeps everything whole. It is using 205 kind of in the north here, south of Rocky Butte. But then it does include, I can turn on the neighborhood boundaries to show that it's then jogging over in Montavilla to use 82nd. It's splitting Montavilla, but this is exactly what the area we just looked at with the Jade District. It's extending a little bit farther to the north here up to Stark. But in the map we were looking at before, which has that northern boundary here, the Jade District, that's right about here, north of Division. But then it's using that same pink boundary we were just looking at to capture the few census blocks that are on the west side of 82nd. So keeping the kind of enlarged Jade District all within that green. So this dividing line between what I'll simply call the North or Northeast District and the Southeast District would be 84 till you get to Hollywood, where it then picks up Sandy Boulevard. Continues that as a dividing line, which does run between the neighborhood organizations of Roseway and City Park, but I think commissioners and the public would have good comments on if that is, the Sandy is arterial road, that's more of a dividing line that should be respected, or if the residents of Rose City Park that live up north and south of Sandy feel like they should be together.
Alex, we have a few hands.
Great.
Commissioner Van Sickle, I think yours is left over from the last one, but correct me. Okay. So Commissioner Lorente, followed by Commissioner Hanson, and then Commissioner Monjadas. Commissioner Lorente.
Thank you. Yeah, just thinking about what Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins said about offering a narrative and sort of justification for this. Just as the author of this draft sample map, I just wanted to say that I sort of drew this from the perspective of someone who is transit reliant, and coming from the transportation justice space, I just wanted to give some appreciation and to the power of, equitable access to public transit and how that can really hold communities together. So some of my guiding sort of questions for this map is not so much how do we divide Portland into 4 separate districts, but how do we stitch together 4 districts into one Portland? And I think, that's sort of reflected here in using some of our major corridors, not just as boundaries, but also as like bonds between these districts. And as something we've talked about here is I think it's important that these lines also make intuitive sense to Portlanders. And I believe by deferring to these corridors over, say, neighborhood boundaries, I think that kind of accomplishes that. You think about 82nd or being north or south of Sandy. Those are like, places that community members sort of orient themselves by. And also just to add a little clarity on the eastern border of the West Side District, I am following the Central East Side Industrial Council boundary line, and then linking that up to the orange line, which runs along McLaughlin Boulevard. So that's the boundary there that Alex is pointing at. So just wanted to offer that as folks are thinking about this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, so one of the things I thought of when looking at this map is I think something that Commissioner Chisholm said earlier, which was instead of trying to get precise numbers, how do we have lines that look clean? And so, for example, the 2 places that I might suggest making small changes on this map are one in the Montevilla area along 82nd, also due to the public comment that we heard this evening, just like having 82nd be like the straight line down. And then over in the Central East Side where we were just looking, it does look a little funky right there. So if there was a way that we could like smooth that out somehow in a way that also kind of felt natural, that would be my one comment for that. And then what I like about this map and the map prior is I think it could be good to have one map that, for example, uses Sandy as a boundary and another one that uses Roseway and Rose City Park Neighborhood Association boundaries as a line, and have that be like one example of how the 2 maps are in conversation with each other, which I know I've said a lot. Those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manhattan.
Thank you. I have 2 thoughts. So one, I'm in the Rose City neighborhood and folks actually do convene north of Sandy. So would advocate for keeping that neighborhood together. I'm actually going to be attending that neighborhood meeting next week, and I can already hear the uproar of dividing that neighborhood in that way, just because folks do go into that space. So understanding that, I appreciate Commissioners Lorente's just explaining sort of that corridor and the transportation piece of it. And I think just recognizing that people on both sides are served, right? So it just where we can sort of keep those corners of the neighborhoods together, I think we should definitely strive to do that. And I will advocate for the Rose City one just because that's where I live. And on the Central East Side, because this looks very similar to me, understanding that it is obviously different than the other 2 maps, it just feels like a blending of the other 2 maps. I don't think it's very different. So if we could for this or for the other one, make sure that when we're doing engagement for those districts that we have a convening in that Central East Side area. So I would be really curious to hear from folks in that community about where they identify and want to be located as we go through the process, if these are the 3 maps that we land on. So please don't get me in trouble by breaking up the Rose City neighborhood. That would be terrible. And if we can just get more feedback from that Central East Side district, that would be helpful.
You heard it here first, folks.
I live near Hollywood, and I think they feel the same way about Sandy.
Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. As I have worked on dozens of iterations of these maps, it seems that we always end up in the end on Sandy Boulevard and having to make this choice around Cully and Sumner and Rose City Park and Roseway and Madison South, a little bit the Grant Park Hollywood zone, but particularly Rose City Park and Roseway. And I have been talking to folks, and I've heard what you just said. Don't split the neighborhood. I've heard Sandy Boulevard is this sort of massive thing, and everybody south of it is a Montevilla person. Everybody north of it is a Alameda, Alberta person. I've heard, well, that's true for Rose City Park, they split on Sandy, but in Roseway, well, we have a wall around Roseway. I've heard every variation of this feedback. So I actually would love, and I have no idea. So I would love commissioners to be weighing in on this question of how we ought to configure those puzzle pieces. I would love the public, if anybody's still listening to us, to weigh in on those questions. I'm hoping we get that question answered for us in July, because I think it's a place where, after we do everything else, it's a place where we end up sort of balancing the population numbers. And I want to make sure that we're not just balancing the population numbers, but we're doing it in a way that is smart and coherent and makes sense to the folks who live there.
Thank you, Commissioner Chisholm. So we have 11 minutes left, and I know that we wanted to walk through map 11. Commissioner Bonante, I just wanted to check that hand is left over from the last, your last comment, right? I'm pretty sure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All good, Alex.
Yep. Great, thanks. Jump right in, same story, West Side District, just crossing the line in a different place here, notably not in the southeast, but only central east side, but then extending into sunny side a little bit here, not entirely. Turn on the neighborhood boundary, organization boundaries, if that helps briefly. So we got Kearns, Buckman, and then part of Sunnyside. And then East Side District, again, using Highway 205 around Rocky Butte right here. Then using that rough boundary for Jade District, that's just north of Division. And then jogging back over here to use 82nd all the way down south. Turn on the neighborhood boundaries one more time just to get a sense of Lentz being in the green East Side District, Montevilla having that small division considering the J District. And then as we've been focused on that dividing line here, that's roughly around Sandy. So in this case, we're still using 84. So we get to Hollywood. And then this map is kind of a juxtaposition to the other two. It's not doing all neighborhood boundaries or just Sandy as a dividing line, but splitting the difference with Rose City Park being a neighborhood boundary, whereas Roseway is then divided by Sandy Boulevard.
There was a request. Mr. Chisholm, do you want to make it?
Yeah, so this is the one I've been stewarding with lots of feedback from commissioners and others. And you can see the confusion I have been living with Rose City Park Roseway. In an earlier version, sample map 7, I had Sumner in with Cully, which was feedback from Commissioner Lumley. Once we pulled Lloyd Center into the north, we had to balance it somewhere. So Sumner goes, which pairs it back with the Park Rose School District, which it's part of. So there's, for me, this is an area that needs a lot of work, and again, would love the feedback. If Alex, if you would pull up the AAPI census piece again here, you will see that the goal was to, there you are, was to really make sure that we drew that line around the J District and really keep the AAPI community population as much as we can together. There are some bubbles to the west of 82nd, but per the feedback we heard from the J District community in Apano, they're good with that. They would prefer that, actually. I'll stop talking there. You've all heard me about this before many times, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manjarres.
Yeah, so for this one gives me the most heartburn. I think this is the one I probably will support, least just for full transparency's sake. I'm curious about who was engaged from the Buckman neighborhood and some of the areas that were pulled into the west side in developing this map.
There's more work to be done there, but I've been talking to some folks who live there, and the key here is, as I showed you earlier, to me it's the densest renter centric zones. in the city.
But have we engaged with the renter organizations, the tenants' rights organizations, and other folks who are in those areas?
I have not.
I think it's worth maybe, and again, I'm gonna just make a point as we're getting to the end and towards the last minutes here. I would like us to have in the agenda more detail about when we're gonna make more formal decisions around votes, motions, taking things off the table, just to be prepared. And I think for this particular map, if there, and Commissioner Chisholm is, maybe we could figure this out. I do think there needs to be more engagement with the folks who are in that inner east side so that we do have some justification around where those lines were drawn. Again, I heard a justification in the last map around the industrial corridor and getting it a little bit closer to the downtown area. This one fully pulls inner southeast into the west side, and there's just severe cultural differences there. So I'm trying to understand who's been engaged so that we can figure out how to fill those gaps.
Thanks, Commissioner. And just as a point of clarification, when we're setting the agenda, we actually don't designate specific time for when commissioners are allowed to make motions. In the bylaws, a commissioner can raise a motion at any time. So and so
maybe it's just an informal request to the chairs who are creating the agenda in partnership with the facilitators. It would make me feel more comfortable if there was more of a process, because I do feel like we voted on some things that I didn't have a chance to review. And I can imagine if I'm confused and I'm tracking this through the process, that the public is also confused about what just happened and which maps were thrown off the table, given where we started the conversation at 6 o'clock.
And I think the process of kind of narrowing and focusing to some extent is you can plan some of it, but also some of it is organic too, as the discussion just starts to coalesce. And so we'll try to be just more thoughtful and clear around kind of when things seem to be coalescing and when, motions might make the most sense, try to get a little bit more of a temperature check too. So thank you for the feedback. Commissioner Hanson and then Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, and I'll just point to the clock. So we have a few more minutes.
Thank you. I have a process suggestion in terms of next steps, which is in part in response to what Commissioner Manhar has just raised. So my process suggestion is going to be to have Flow Analytics take the feedback on these 3 maps that we just looked at and circulate updated versions by early next week, if possible, to all of the commissioners, and then invite folks to email Commissioner Lumley and me directly, since we can't have deliberation via email, to email us directly if there are any big red flags or big questions that you have that would make you feel uncomfortable voting on the maps when we show up on the 31st, because I'm thinking about, our next meeting in 2 weeks is actually voting. So if we can get the updated versions of these 3 maps where we have at least narrowed 2, get those circulated so everyone has some time to look at them, digest them, and then make any additional tweaks if needed, still with enough time to show up on the 31st, knowing what we are voting on. That would be my suggestion. Go ahead.
Commissioner Hanson, just to clarify, you are referencing samples maps 9, 10, and 11.
That's
the ones
correct.
we've been primarily discussing. Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Actually, before we go to Commissioners Van Sickle Robbins and Commissioner Lumley, are there any requests for amendment or revised maps that may not have been included in 9, 10, and 11? Okay. Then we'll ask the vote analytics team to incorporate the feedback and then provide revised versions of those, especially with the goal of being able to clean up lines, but also to highlight key differences. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins and then Commissioner Lumley.
Well, I just wanted to, I mentioned it in the chat, but I just wanted to remind us that we have 8 public hearings, and we've been talking about a lot of different kind of components that we want to go out to communities and talk to. And we still have to be able to go also to the central, each zone. So we could end up with more than 8 places where we want to have a conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Lumley, I think you will probably close us out for the evening.
Well, thank you. The motions that I put forward today were based on fairly extensive interaction with the community over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And so I believe that those actions are going to be supported in large part. Obviously can't talk to everybody, but it was a direct response to all that I put into reaching out to community. But what I wanted to suggest also is that before the next meeting, well before the next meeting, those who are working most closely with these maps or the central collaborator, if they could identify a clear rationale and a discussion for each of those maps that talks about the priorities, the goals, and the trade-offs that were considered in the development of those maps. And if we could get those by a date sometime between now and the next meeting, about the halfway point, I don't know what that date would be, maybe next Friday or something. Thursday, if that's possible.
We can probably identify different folks to provide that in the interim, but to be able to have that narrative that works. And Commissioner Manjarrez, I do just want to ask out loud because we're going back and forth in the chat. So you mean, Temple,
Yeah.
you had a request for an additional map or revisions to a map that would alter map 11 and push its boundary, push its eastern boundary further closer to the river, but would not
Yeah, and
maps
can I
9 and 10 do that?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the areas around, as I get closer, looking at Laurelhurst Park, for example, you have folks on the west side of Laurelhurst Park who are disconnected from the park that they're actually next door to. And so I think part of it is just sort of respecting those pieces. To me, this just feels very pushed out into Southeast. And so if we could find sort of those hubs of communities, I think that would make it something that would be more palatable.
Alex, could you put up the neighborhood boundaries on this map? Yeah, so it follows the neighborhood boundary. And again, I'm a broken record now, but it's also really about the renter-centric blocks. And of course, the homes that are on the edge of the park are big, wealthy, very big, expensive homes with homeowners. But just to the west of it, those are renter-centric blocks.
I know, but you're pulling it into the west side. And I think part of it is coming back into, and this is the last thing I'll say on it, is that when we're thinking about communities, I think it's nice to think about the neighborhood districts. I just gave an example with Rose City Park, understanding my own community up in Northeast and having been in this area, a lot of the folks in inner Southeast live, work, and play in this area. And so when we're talking about renters in this area, and there are renters around the Laurelhurst neighborhood, and many different, there's the whole Belmont neighborhood bars and all of those different folks, they're all in that area. So if we can have some coherence around the actual spaces that the community congregates and hangs out in, and be thoughtful about how we're preserving those. And again, this may come up in community engagement. I just want us to have some engagement with those folks in the community. I'm speaking from a place of experience and just knowing folks in those communities, like we're pulling them fully into a West Side district. And so I think that some engagement there to move that into a space where they could at least have access to those different amenities, service points, areas where folks hang out. I think it's going to be really important to honor, even in the description as we take it to the community. So it sounds like there is some thoughtfulness around that.
Here's what we'll do.
Yeah,
Thank you, commissioners.
There's nothing about a city council district boundary that prevents people from enjoying an amenity across the street. I will also say that map number, I've lost the numbers now, the one that Commissioner Lorente has worked on that is short, that one, yes, that is shorter in the east side and extends down to Brooklyn. He and I have been exchanging, having a conversation about that. Finding a happy medium between what he's done in Brooklyn and what I've been doing in Central East Side. There's work to be done here, but I'll stop talking. Thank you.
So we'll pause it here. And Commissioner Haynes, I'll just add one thing. So we do have three maps right now that we can treat it as our base maps. They are sample maps 9, 10, and 11. You have time between this meeting and the next meeting to spend some time with them and to really start to hone in. Like you have the versions here, but we'll also have updated, cleaned up versions from the Flow Analytics team that you'll be able to review and really start to see side by side. So we'll have those as the base maps. On May 31st, we will focus that time on really workshopping those to see if there probably are any variations that we would like to make, vote on any draft maps I'm going to take into the July hearings and probably move from there. But at this point, some version of the big items that you've been considering are really like with the motions narrowed and focused down, they should be reflected in these three maps, but we can talk about where they may not be in the next session. So I'll leave it with that. It has been a long one. You've covered a lot this meeting, so I do want to say good job. The discussion has been thoughtful and detailed, so thank you. Okay, I know that we do have so we have a final slide just before we close it out. Adam, sorry, I surprised you there. So before we adjourn.
Is there anybody else that'd like to say anything before we adjourn the meeting? Yes,
Commissioner Hanson.
I just want to say thank you. I found tonight's conversation incredibly energizing, incredibly participatory, really successful in terms of continuing narrowing, and I'm feeling optimistic about these next steps and that we don't have to have another full commission meeting next week. And also we will follow up with next steps and things like that, but just feeling tons of gratitude. That's all.
Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, I'm feeling a little anxiety, I guess. Just because we had only one voice so far that I've seen of an African-American leader provide us with feedback. And this is not to say that individual commissioners have not had conversations. That's not what it's about. It's more about the fact that the Black and Brown communities have been historically traumatized by representation in the Portland area, and so and just having reached out to several community leaders, a lot of them are these community. I think this is a new situation where a lot of these community leaders are stretched thin because they're having to represent the communities at the state level, as well as pay attention to the things that's going on at the local level as well. And so some things are getting missed, no fault of their own. But it does, each one has said, at least to me, that that the community is not really aware and not really focused. And so if there's an opportunity for us to think very intentionally about outreach to these communities and developing a listening post within these communities as we define these 8, or if we need to add 1 or 2, that'd be great.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. Well, we have reached out to quite a few from the Black and Brown community and got great feedback. They may not have presented directly at these hearings, but their influence is very apparent in the maps that we are honing in on. I do want to encourage that we have our public sessions in July, that they have a mixture of hosts that include community-based organizations. I think that will significantly increase the amount of comments that we get from the public, from community-based, from communities of color.
I appreciate that. I'm just still a little frustrated by it. So I hope that my frustration is okay with you, and we can sit with that just for a minute. I just really, if we could have that intentional conversation about how to do that, I really would appreciate it. That's all. I'm not saying that individual commissioners have not done it. I think as a collective, we all should be hearing from them. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Judd.
I
Before
do
we close
believe
out,
Oh, go ahead, you go ahead. I was gonna close this out, but
I was gonna just say, ask if there were any other comments or thoughts to share. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Lumley, can you close this out?
great, thank you all. I think we made great progress. I know we're moving pretty quickly, but we don't have much of a choice. I do believe our input has been effective, and I feel really comfortable with this meeting. Our next meeting is Wednesday, May 31st from 6 to 9 p.m. It'll be hybrid. We'll also offer the meeting room in the Portland Building Room 108 or by Zoom. I also encourage the public to continue to provide input with maps and also written testimony. And I look forward to seeing everybody on May 31st. Thank you.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.